351. After Zhong Kuei left the post house, the old daoist took him into an old acacia tree. The old daoist suddenly turned around and appeared in front of Chen Pingan's courtyard in a single step. Chen Pingan, who was still in a daze, quickly bowed and cupped his fists. Junior Chen Pingan greets old immortal master. Zhong Kuei's narration of his death was light, but when he mentioned the daoist of Tranquil Mountain, he did not hide his closeness. The old daoist gestured with his hand, "No need to be so polite." Chen Pingan straightened his back and asked, "Old immortal master, why have you come back?" The old Taoist looked at Chen Pingan and nodded, "If you can be tied up, then you are a true hero. No wonder Huang Ting and Zhong Kuei look at you in a different light." Chen Pingan didn't understand, but he didn't ask. The old daoist was in a good mood and asked with a smile, "You call yourself a swordsman, where is your sword?" The old daoist of Tranquil Mountain turned a blind eye to the Flying Sword 1 and Flying Sword 15 that appeared from the blade-strengthening gourd. Chen Pingan said honestly, "I used to practice fist techniques and just started practicing swordsmanship. Therefore, when I practice swordsmanship, I only hold the sword in the air and visualize it in my mind." The old daoist muttered to himself, "If I knew this, I wouldn't have competed with others in divination. Not only did I lose, I also missed the chance to see your situation in the lotus flower paradise." The old daoist was tall and wore a hibiscus crown that symbolized one of the 3 branches of Taoism. His robe was white and his hair and beard were white. He looked like an immortal. Chen Pingan did not know how to answer, so he did not speak. Facing an old immortal with sharp eyes, there was no need to pretend to be smart. Any disguise would be like an old woman putting on rouge or a child wearing an official's robe. It would only make a fool of himself. The old daoist suddenly asked, "I can lend you a sword. 60 years or 100 years, we can negotiate. You can exchange it with magic weapons or pay the guyu." Chen Pingan hesitated for a moment before shaking his head and saying, "Thank you old immortal for your kind intentions, but I actually already have a sword." Chen Pingan blushed a little. "Besides, I don't have any GUU money on me." The old daoist didn't insist. The reason why he wanted to lend the sword to this young man was because he admired the promise between him and Zhong Kuei. There was also a deeper layer of selfishness and kindness in it. However, after saying those words, he already regretted it. It was better not to spoil things through excessive enthusiasm. The chaos in the Fuxia sect worried the old daoist priest. As for why he had returned to the small courtyard, it was because he had noticed the unusual movements in Chen Pingan's heart lake. It seemed that Zhong Kuei's death had greatly affected this person's state of mind. But when he looked at it carefully, he relaxed. For cultivators, it was taboo to have a mind like a small boat, drifting with the current. As for those whose state of mind was as messy as Willow Catkins, in the eyes of the old daoist, they were not worthy to talk about taboo. They should not cultivate Tao at all. After cultivating Tao, they were lucky enough to climb to a higher realm. Everything they did was for personal gain, snatching opportunities, fighting for magic weapons, seizing spiritual qi, and leaving the mountain to roam the world. Apart from showing off and bullying others, what good could they do? However, no matter how much the old daoist disliked those qi cultivators who cultivated their strength but not their mind, he could only guard the peaceful mountain and keep the sect's reputation intact. Chen Pingan asked shamelessly, "Old immortal, do you have a mountain guarding formation?" The old daoist nodded and said, "The peaceful mountain has 2 mountain guarding formations. The center of the formation is the bright moon mirror, which can illuminate all demons and evil in the world, making it impossible for them to hide. The distance depends on the cultivation of the person holding the mirror. Once the mirror shines on you, you can temporarily drop your realm. After that, it will be the 4 sword formation's turn. 4 ancient swords, imitations of the 4 great immortal swords from ancient times, are half-immortal weapons. After forming the sword formation, it is equivalent to an immortal weapon. It can travel thousands of miles in the blink of an eye. If that old beast had not refined one of them, I would have killed it long ago. It would be fine even if it ran for thousands of miles. Now it has escaped death, but the realm of immortals is still around. The old beast has just entered the 12th realm and his realm is not stable. Moreover, He is suppressed by the rules of this world. Now that his natal item has been destroyed and his true body has been pierced with several holes, injuring his primordial spirit, it is not worth mentioning. When the old daoist mentioned the old ape with the sword on his back, he was full of murderous intent. His majestic spiritual energy seemed to materialize, forming a white mist that lingered in the surroundings like thin streams of water. The old daoist calmed his mind and the strange phenomenon disappeared. This was actually one of the side effects of the drop in realm. The trouble is that the old beast suddenly drilled into the ground and disappeared along the broken ancient dragon vein. It was most likely a premeditated escape route. The old daoist pointed to the top of his head. Earlier, I fought with that old bastard, and then I beat back a big boss from the underworld. Of course, a certain scholarly sage who was in charge of overseeing the canopy above the bronze leaf continent naturally saw it and landed on our peaceful mountain. When he learned of Zhong Kuei's death, he flew into a rage and personally went after that white ape. Who would have thought that the old bastard would still hide him? Now, let's see if Huang Ting, who has some karma with it, can find some clues. As long as we find it, even if Huang Ting dies in battle, one of the 72 sages in the Confucian temple will be able to kill it with a single strike. Chen Pinggan wanted to say something, but he hesitated. The old daoist smiled and said, "This is the worst-case scenario. Huang Ting has always been lucky, and her temperament has been sharpened at the lotus flower-blessed land. With the protection of the two ancient swords, she might have a chance to break through to the next realm by chasing after the white ape." Chen Pinggan nodded. The old daoist wore a mocking smile. "After I dragged her out of the lotus flower-blessed land, I thought she would complain to me for a long time, but she didn't complain at all. She even mentioned you many times along the way, saying that she must find you at the dragon spring of Dali." The old daoist waved his sleeves. "That's strange. I'm not a talkative person. What I said tonight is equivalent to decades of saliva. Back to the topic, the defensive formation of our peaceful mountain has a long history. It's capable of both offense and defense, comparable to many of the superior sects and orthodox sects in the Central Plains. It's not appropriate for me to teach you the way to refine and operate the formation, as it involves the fortune of the mountains and rivers of the peaceful mountain. However, I have my own defensive formation that I obtained from an ancient immortal's cave abode. It's extremely powerful, so I can sell it to you. However, it's a waste of money. It's expensive to build, and it's a waste of the fortune of the mountains and rivers to maintain the formation. I was planning to give it to Huang Ting as her dowry if she wants to establish her own sect in the Bronze Leaf continent, or if she marries someone and becomes their partner. That way, I'll have to fork out half of my coffin." Chen Pinggan swallowed his saliva. It had nothing to do with Huang Ting's dowry or the coffin. He was shocked by the old daoist's words, "a waste of money." Noticing Chen Pinggan's hesitation, the old daoist laughed heartily and joked, "Good plan, good plan. I like it." Before Chen Pinggan could figure out the crux of the matter, the old daoist had already dropped the topic of the defensive formation and reminded him softly, "Chen Pinggan. Although I don't know what treasure you have with you that can conceal the secrets of the heavens and prevent others from divining your position and fortune, you must cherish such an item. It's truly an item that can only be encountered by chance. There's only one such item in the entire peaceful mountain, and it was left behind by our founding ancestor." Chen Pinggan recalled that inconspicuous oil paper umbrella and nodded heavily. He looked at Chen Pinggan. The old daoist was very pleased. Female Crown Huang Ting and Gentleman Zhong Kuei were both young men that the old daoist could count on one hand. And now, Chen Pinggan was added to the mix. The old daoist felt that whether it was the Bronze Leaf continent in the southeast or the vast Howran world, it was better to have one more young man like him. The world was in chaos again. There were still pillars of support. In order to prevent Zhong Kuei's ghost from being taken to the Yellow Springs Road by the Mansion of the Dead, the old daoist had dropped a realm. He knew very well that he would never have the chance to make up for his biggest regret in this lifetime. After the founding ancestor of Peaceful Mountain successfully ascended to the immortal realm, he was given the title of Lord of Heaven by his daoist orthodoxy. The biggest regret of the old daoist was that in history, whether it was the Howran world of the Confucian school or the Qingming world of the daoist school, As long as a Daoist ascended from a perfected cultivator to a heavenly lord, no matter which of the three sects they belonged to, they would be able to invite the sect master to come and hand over a Daoist robe, a Daoist crown, and a token. However, Lord of Heaven was the newest heavenly lord of the Howran world, yet he didn't get to see the Grand Sect Master leave the Beko Kekyung building and come to the Howran world. The old heavenly lord didn't dare to speculate, but the people of Peaceful Mountain had been thinking about it. For this reason, the sect master of Peaceful Mountain even went to the northernmost academy of the Daoist school to ask if the Confucian saint who had a statue in the Confucian temple had caused trouble for their sect master. The mountain master of the academy was also a straightforward person. He didn't want to beat around the bush with the sect master of Peaceful Mountain, so he asked with a smile. The other two sect masters might have the same treatment, but with the relationship between the Grand Sect Master of your Daoist school and the Confucian school, who would stop him if he wanted to come to the Howran world? After getting the answer, the old heavenly lord was even more depressed. After thinking about it, he could only think that his realm was high enough, but his grand path was still small, so the Grand Sect Master was purposely beating him up. Before the battle at Peaceful Mountain, the old heavenly lord had thought that if he ascended to the Ascendant Realm, he would be able to meet the Grand Sect Master. But now, it was completely an extravagant hope. There was no more regret. It was inevitable. When the old Daoist was about to leave, Chen Pingan said, "Thank you, old Daoist Master." The old Daoist asked with a smile, "Why are you thanking me? Are you talking about Zhong Kuei's fallen realm?" The old heavenly lord shook his head. "There's no need. Peaceful Mountain owes him." Chen Pingan said in a deep voice, "Thank you, old Daoist Master and Peaceful Mountain. You want me to know that the immortals on the mountain also have a chivalrous heart that treats the human world kindly." The old Daoist was in a good mood. "Well, I didn't expect you to be almost the same as Zhong Kuei. You're very good at flattering people." Chen Pingan said helplessly, "Those are my sincere words." The old Daoist looked at the young man with a smile. Sincere flattery. That's what makes people feel good. The old Daoist left in the wind. His little head was leaning against the window, staring at the courtyard in a daze. It was strange that no one in the courier hostel noticed the appearance of Zhong Kuei and the old heavenly lord. Only Pei Qian, perhaps by accident, was looking at Chen Pingan in the courtyard in the middle of the night. Chen Pingan looked back at Pei Qian. "Go to sleep." It would have been better if he hadn't said it. As soon as Chen Pingan gave the order, Pei Qian went to get a stool, climbed up the windowsill nimbly, jumped down, and landed steadily. Chen Pingan asked, "Why aren't you sleeping? What are you doing here?" Pei Qian said fawningly, "I can't sleep, so I'll talk to you for a while." Chen Pingan waved his hand and said that he wanted to practice the fist stance, so he could stay if he wanted. Pei Qian felt sleepy after watching for the time it took for an incense stick to burn. He said something to Chen Pingan, then took a deep breath and sprinted toward the windowsill. He jumped high, probably trying to press his hands on the windowsill and then use his legs to push himself up. He thought that he would look cool if he jumped up. In the end, his chin hit the windowsill. He fell backward. Chen Pingan turned his head, unable to look straight at him. Pei Qian sat on the ground and covered his mouth with his hand. He turned his head away, his eyes hazy with tears. Chen Pingan walked over, squatted down, and gently took her hand away. He looked at it and asked with a smile, "Are you still trying to act heroic?" Tears fell from the little girl's tanned face. Chen Pingan had to stop smiling and helped her stand up. "There's a little girl about the same age as you. She's also impatient, but she can endure pain better than you. If it were her, she would definitely smile at me and maybe even comfort me not to worry." Chen Pingan added, "But everyone has their own temperament. You don't have to learn from her." The two sat at the stone table. Pei Qian only dared to open his mouth slightly and asked vaguely, "What's her name?" Chen Pingan said, "Her name is Li Baoping. She likes to wear red cotton-padded jackets and calls me little martial uncle." Pei Qian asked again in a low voice, "You like her a lot?" Chen Pingan nodded. Who in the world doesn't like Li Baoping's little martial uncle? She was right. Pei Qian was silent. Chen Pingan asked, "How was it when you saw me practicing my stance?" Pei Qian's face was blank. It wasn't an act. He didn't know why he was asking this. Chen Pinggan was also puzzled. You didn't think of secretly learning? Pei Qian retorted, why would I imitate you and walk around? She stood up, in high spirits, baring her fangs and brandishing her claws. She pretended to draw her sword and poked around with her 2 fingers. She jumped a few times and even did a set of martial arts. After showing off for a while, she said, of course I want to learn the most powerful moves. Chen Pinggan didn't think it was funny at all. Instead, his expression was serious. On the main street of Lotus Flower Paradise, Lu Fang was riding on his sword. Chen Pinggan's school dragon. And the drum-beating god form that forced Zhong Qiu to retreat. It was mixed with some scattered moves of the devil Ding Ying. It wasn't exactly similar. But someone once said, if you practice the fist but don't practice the true meaning, you will be laughed at by ghosts and gods. But if you practice the fist and put aside all the moves in one step and practice the true meaning, in Chen Pinggan's impression, there was only one person who could do it. Sure enough. Chen Pinggan asked a question, what did you see when you stared at Taoist Master Shao during the day? Pei Qian didn't dare to answer. Chen Pinggan said, as long as you don't lie, it doesn't matter what you say. Pei Qian looked around and said softly, I think that Shao doesn't have good intentions. He's not a good person. Chen Pinggan asked a second question, did you see the old Taoist master tonight? Pei Qian nodded vigorously. Chen Pinggan felt helpless. That was the Grand Master of Mount Peace who used the abbot's heaven and earth. Chen Pinggan asked again, if you become successful in martial arts in the future, and you think someone bullied you, what would you do? Tell me the truth. Pei Qian hesitated, beat him half to death with one punch. Seeing that Chen Pinggan was about to get angry, Pei Qian decided to give up. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and said angrily, beat him to death with one punch. Chen Pinggan asked with a smile, what if you're wrong? Pei Qian said confidently, I'm by your side every day. How could I make a mistake? Chen Pinggan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said with a straight face, but you'll go out and travel by yourself one day. Pei Qian said resolutely, I won't. Why should I go out alone? There are so many bad guys out there. What if I can't beat them? Also, if I don't bring enough money and starve every day, you'll beat me and scold me if you find out I'm going to steal or rob. What can I do? Right. So I'd better not go out. Chen Pinggan asked, what if one day you become so good at martial arts that you're even better than me? Pei Qian frowned and thought about it carefully. She shook her head desperately, I'm lazy. I like to sleep and I'm afraid of pain. It's not like you don't know. There are blisters on the soles of my feet when I walk. When they burst, I cried until my throat was hoarse. When you fight with someone at the inn, you won't cry even if your bones are visible. I can't. When I look down at my arms, I might faint from fright. Sigh, if there's a peerless martial art that can be learned in one night without suffering, then it'll be great. Chen Pinggan held back his laughter. You also know that you're lazy, unmotivated, and timid. Pei Qian drooped her head, dejected. Chen Pinggan asked, why aren't you saying anything? Pei Qian felt wronged, my chin hurts. Chen Pinggan smiled and turned around. He leaned against the stone table and looked at the night sky. Pei Qian imitated him, but she was small, so she could only lean the back of her head against the stone table. Chen Pinggan said softly, after the new year, you'll be 11, so you have to read more books and learn more principles. There was still a long way to go. It was more tiring than practicing a million punches. But it was good. It was rare for Chen Pinggan to talk to Pei Qian. When I was in my hometown, I was a little older than you, and I never read books. Mr. Qi told me that principles are in books, but life is outside of them. Chen Pinggan finally murmured, I hope that everyone in the world can meet a Mr. Qi when they're young. Pei Qian was still a little girl who only liked to listen to what she liked. For example, Chen Pinggan said that she would be 11 next year. In this world, only Chen Pinggan would remember these things. She was 10 this year and 11 next year. The old Taoist of Peace Mountain suddenly stopped and took out the locust wood. Zhong Kuei's ghost appeared and floated down. Above the sea of clouds, Zhong Kuei saw a familiar person standing not far away. It was the Hill Master of the Dafu Academy, his teacher. The Hill Master of the Academy just looked at Zhong Kuei. Zhong Kuei asked in a low voice, "Teacher?" The Hill Master seemed to not dare to believe the bad news. Even now, he couldn't believe what he saw. It shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this. He shouldn't have gone to the roaming green mansion back then, and he shouldn't have let this disciple whom he liked the most go to the peaceful mountain. He should have stayed in the inn in the border town and kept an eye on the nine-tailed fox that had hidden itself. Although the nine-tailed fox was a big demon in the 12th state, her identity was too special and her seniority was too high. Therefore, her real name had long been exposed. As long as Zhong Kuei knew the real names of all the ancient big demons in the world, he would have the power to protect himself. No one thought that the sword-bearing white ape of Peace Mountain was the culprit of the escape of the demons in Well Prison. Zhong Kuei couldn't stand the current atmosphere and said loudly, "Teacher, it's my duty." Scholars either use their knowledge to educate the common people and support the country, or they use their righteousness to get rid of evil and defend the Tao. The Hill Master was furious. "Do I need you to talk to me about these principles?" Zhong Kuei kept quiet out of fear. The old Heavenly Lord sighed. "If the Academy asks, we, Peace Mountain, will not shirk." The Hill Master didn't treat the old Taoist the same way he treated Zhong Kuei. He said respectfully, "My elder brother is angry but he won't ask for punishment." What's wrong with Peace Mountain? When did the Heavenly Lord blame Zhong Kuei for not being able to protect Peace Mountain? Why couldn't he protect that earth immortal? Zhong Kuei added softly, "Teacher, the old Taoist is called Liang Su." The Hill Master was about to get angry again. Zhong Kuei shut up immediately. The old Taoist sighed. After this disaster, the Tongyi continent might be a little better, but the Suro continent and the Fuyao continent will be in chaos. The appearance of treasures in the three continents was indeed a demon's plan. The old man whispered, "The Academy must protect that youth from the Fuyao sect. If he can see through this." He didn't continue. The Hill Master nodded. "Of course. I've already discussed it with the Fuyao sect. That youth will enter the Great Fu Academy to study under an alias. As for whether he will become a Confucian disciple in the future, it's all up to him." The old Taoist smiled. "If Jihai's disciple in seclusion goes to be a virtuous man, won't the Fuyao sect fight you to the death?" The Hill Master sighed when he mentioned the Fuyao sect and the great cultivator Jihai. Jihai frankly said that he should accept the youth as his disciple and give him that weapon. But when he saw the youth, he couldn't calm down. His cultivation will be hindered and he won't be able to enter the immortal realm for the rest of his life. How will he go to the Great Wall of Sword Chi and kill the other 12th realm demons? The old Taoist looked regretful. The Tongyi continent's only immortal Tao companions of the upper 5 realms. They are a rare match made in heaven. It's a pity that Jihai's breakthrough will be very difficult. The more stubborn he is, the harder it will be to get rid of his inner demon. The Hill Master smiled bitterly. Some things can be persuaded, but some are not. The old Taoist sighed. The difficulty of cultivation was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. It was just that a long time ago, it was said that ascending to the heavens wasn't difficult, but cultivating was. Central Plains, at the peak of one of the most majestic mountains, a golden-armored deity was holding onto a sword with both hands. His face was covered with a mask, making it impossible to see his face. He stood beside a stone tablet on the peak of the mountain, and an old Confucian scholar was sitting cross-legged on top of the stone tablet. The old man pinched his fingers in his sleeves and slapped his thigh. "Great!" The golden-armored deity's lips twitched. The old man was proud of himself and asked, "How is my disciple in seclusion?" The golden-armored deity, who had been pestered by the old man for a whole month, said impatiently, "Good, good, good. Is that good enough?" The shabby old man pointed at the deity who was almost as tall as the huge stone tablet and laughed. "I like your unconvinced attitude the most." Then, the old man started to talk about his past achievements. "Back then, when I quarreled with others and they lost, they all behaved like you. I felt good." The golden-armored deity was one of the 5 righteous deities of the Central Plains. He sneered. Who was the one who suggested letting a poor scholar like you enter the Confucian temple? Tell me, I'll go ask him if he's blind. This was an unsolved case recognized by the Confucians. The old scholar smiled slyly and said, take a guess. No matter how good great god Sui Shan's temper was, he would feel irritated if someone nagged him for a whole month. Moreover, this old man was someone who wouldn't act until he saw the rabbit. How could there be anything good? He didn't stand on ceremony. Guess your grandpa. The old scholar raised his thumb and pointed at himself. Not my grandpa, it's the founder of our Confucian faction. I wish he was my grandpa. Sigh, what a pity. Great god Sui Shan, who was known to be unruly, straightened his back and let go of the hilt of his sword. He cupped his fists and bowed to the heaven and earth, as an apology to the Holy Master. The old scholar continued, you should know that I am a very thin-skinned person. I always like to remind myself that I don't deserve a reward if I haven't done anything for it. But I am talented, I write well, and I speak well. Hence, our holy teacher found me and tried to persuade me with kind words. I was very touched. Our holy teacher told me many things that I thought were ordinary. But there was one sentence that I felt touched the bottom of my heart. Since ancient times, sages must be true heroes, but heroes may not be sages. When I heard that, I felt that our holy master understood me. Thus, I made a small request to this founder. Great god Sui Shan said in a deep voice, I don't want to hear it. Shut up. The old scholar lamented. Why can't you tell the good from the bad? Great god Sui Shan sneered. If I could tell the good from the bad, would I let you go up the mountain? The old scholar rubbed his chin. He felt that he wasn't in the right in this matter. He immediately changed his words. That old bull of the Eastern Sea doesn't have a likable personality. But he's still a decent person. He's generous and doesn't embarrass himself. I know that he gave that kid a good thing. Even though it doesn't help his cultivation, there's nothing better than a coincidence in this world. It can help conceal the secrets of heaven. It's even better than Alliance's broken bamboo hat. Just based on this gift, I won't argue with him about the dirty things he did in the lotus flower-blessed land. Great god Sui Shan said sarcastically, even if you want to arm wrestle with him, can you? The old scholar said earnestly, we scholars still have to compete with others in terms of reasoning. Fighting, killing, and piercing through the sky isn't considered true ability. For the first time, great god Sui Shan didn't refute. The old scholar held his hands in his sleeves. The astral wind on the peak of Sui Shan raged. Even great god Sui Shan's golden armor had ripples of talisman. But the old scholar's sleeves and hair didn't flutter at all. The old scholar said softly, it's hard for a saint to die, but it's hard for a gentleman to live. Among the 100 schools of thought, only we Confucians don't pay attention to Taoist protectors. The academies are the greatest Taoist protectors of the world's scholars. In the vast world, the 3 major academies and 72 academies all have such gentlemen who died before they became saints. I feel that these gentlemen who aren't smart enough are the backbone of our world. We can. At this point, the old scholar was suddenly at a loss for words. He turned his head and shouted, blockhead, think of an explanation. Great god Sui Shan said indifferently, indomitable spirit. The old scholar slapped his thigh again. Good. Great god Sui Shan said coldly, you've never been a proper Confucian gentleman. The old scholar was silent. In the Confucian temple, a sage walked out from his clay statue. His altar was extremely high, and his statue was very close to the supreme sage. He was even holding the hand of a young man who followed him to the vast world from another world. After bringing the young man over the threshold, the sage turned around and glanced at the empty statue. He smiled at the young man and said, if you have the chance in the future, you can compete with someone. 352. The last sentence at the end of the chapter is a comment from a reader in the circle. It is really well written. After the old Lord of Heaven and Zhong Kuei left, nothing happened that night. Pei Qian, who was fighting to keep his eyes open, carried Chen Pinggan to the windowsill and let him go back to sleep. Chen Pinggan stayed alone in the courtyard. He didn't practice his stances or swordsmanship. He sat at the stone table and thought about his future plans. Occasionally, he would be absent-minded and look up at the night sky. He heard from Zhong Kuei that among the saints of the Confucian Temple, except for some who went to explore new territories and find new paradises, the rest of the saints would stay in the sky above the vast continents, lakes, and seas, overlooking the mortal world. In their eyes, the great cultivators of the mortal world, whether they were on the mountain or below the mountain, were like fireflies floating in the summer night. The strength of the light depended on the level of the immortals on the land. Therefore, in the Battle of Mount Taiping, he fought with all his might with the white ape. He no longer concealed his aura. In the eyes of the sages above the Tongya continent, they were like two balls of light that suddenly exploded. Therefore, the sages came down to prevent the great cultivators with supernatural powers from being unreasonable or fighting out of personal anger. If they were to lose their scruples, they would destroy the mountains and rivers and cause suffering to the common people. Most of the time, Chen Pinggan closed his eyes and rested, silently reciting the immortal formula on the jade slip of the azure touring mansion. After reading it 100 times, the meaning would be revealed. All the methods in the world could not be separated from the origin. At dawn, Chen Pinggan opened his eyes and heard the footsteps of the old General Yarozhen outside the courtyard. He stopped at the entrance of the courtyard, as if he was hesitating whether to knock or not. Chen Pinggan got up to open the door. Yarozhen smiled and said, "You are indeed a master of martial arts. You can distinguish people by listening to their footsteps." Chen Pinggan asked, "Shall we take a walk in the garden of the post house to relax?" Yarozhen walked side by side with Chen Pinggan and said slowly, "The reason why I didn't follow you to visit the place where the ancient immortal ascended on the crane yesterday was that I received news that the secret envoy of the Mirage City was coming to the post house. Therefore, I had to wait. We waited until the second watch in the evening before the VIP arrived. Guess who it is?" Since he was asking about Chen Pinggan, he was definitely not a person from Mirage City that had nothing to do with him. Chen Pinggan's eyes flashed as he replied, "Dukshan, Gao Shizhen." Yarozhen gave him a thumbs up and nodded. "That's the High Duke. Those who came did not come with good intentions, and those with good intentions did not come." Since Dukshan was appointed as a secret envoy to Riding Crane City before the Yarrow family's troops entered the Mirage City, it meant that in the Emperor's heart, Dukshan was more important than the future Minister of War, Yarozhen. As for whether the Liu family's emperor had given him orders before Dukshan left the capital, Chen Pinggan had never seen the emperor, so he couldn't guess. Therefore, Dukshan's secret entry into Riding Crane City's posthouse was no different from an enormous display of strength to the old general. It was not easy to live in the capital. Even if you were Yarozhen, you were still an outsider from the border. Chen Pinggan benefited a lot from the long trip to the Lotus Flower-blessed land where he accompanied the old Daoist of Donghai to observe the Tao. Perhaps it was only until the moment he left the Lotus Flower-blessed land that the last bit of dirt on his trousers was shaken off. Yarozhen slowly said, "In the Great Spring Dynasty, there are a total of 10 dukes with different surnames. The Liu family has been established for 200 years, and after many ups and downs, only Dukshan's mansion is left. The old Duke Shen Guogong's reputation was very good, and he was a fair person. Twice, he took the risk of having the Duke Shen Guogong's horizontal inscribed board taken down, and separately, he protected a group of high-ranking officials and a military general from the border. Therefore, in the imperial court, whether civil or military, everyone cherished the incense burning of these two Duke Shen Guogong. The current Duke Shen Guogong, Gao Shizhen, kept a low profile and did not like to be in the limelight too much. However, when he was young, he had close contact with that secret residence. Looking back, this Duke Shen Guogong was not simple. That's why Jiao Shuyi has the ability to do whatever he wants in the Mirage City. Chen Pinggan suddenly interrupted, Jiao Shuyi is domineering and has annoyed all kinds of influential people. This may be a way for the Dukshan's mansion to tarnish their reputation. The two generations of Dukshan have each used their own ability to obtain benefits that the officials don't even dare to think about. If Jiao Shuyi doesn't do anything, the Dukshan's mansion may end up in the same situation as the Yarrow family's border army. Yarozhen's expression was strange, and he once again gave Chen Pinggan a thumbs up. It's similar to my granddaughter's opinion. However, Yarozhen patted Chen Pinggan's shoulder. However, this opinion was said by our Jinji when she was 14 years old. Chen Pinggan laughed inwardly. Why did you, old General Yarrow, want to compete with me? But his mouth still echoed, Miss Jinji has an orchid heart and a pure mind. She is an expert in all sorts of studies. Naturally, I am far from her. A smile bloomed on Yarozhen's weathered face, and the haze in his heart was swept away. As for what Duke Shen and Jiao Shizhen talked about when they arrived at the post house, Yarozhen, as a subject of the Liu family, would naturally not reveal anything. However, if the Duke Shen and Mirage City wanted to deal with his little benefactor, Yarozhen didn't mind dying again. In any case, his old life was returned to Chen Pinggan, and the Yarrow family had profited. After all, the Yarrow family's cavalry could be considered to have completely escaped from this storm. This was the conclusion that his granddaughter had reached after sending Jiao Shizhen out of the city last night and returning to the post house to talk with Yarrow Jinji. When Yarozhen entered the capital, the Mirage City would have a grand ceremony to welcome him. The reputation of the Yarrow family's cavalry would be promoted by layers of officials and spread throughout the court. The garden of the post house was extremely famous. Under the efforts of scholars, poets, and demoted officials, it had the reputation of the beauty of the mountains and lakes, the elegance of the pavilions. The kings of the capital cannot compare. Under the shade of the trees, under a small bridge with flowing water, the two walked onto a wooden arch bridge. Chen Pinggan's familiarity with the structure of the bridge was probably no less than an official from the Ministry of Works. Chen Pinggan walked on the bridge, his footsteps sometimes light and sometimes heavy. He reached out his hand and lightly tapped on the railing. Yarozhen only treated it as a hobby and didn't ask about it out of curiosity. The Yarrow family's troops would leave the day after tomorrow. Tonight, there was a banquet hosted by the provincial governor. Tomorrow, the governor would privately invite the old General Yarozhen, so they could still play around in Crane City for 2 more days. Chen Pinggan remained in the courtyard to cultivate. The speed of his advancement in the martial path had far exceeded his expectations when he left the inverted mountain. There was no need to rush, and it couldn't be rushed. As for the matter of rebuilding the longevity bridge, there was a hint of urgency to it. In his 2 visualizations, one at the Lotus Blossom Blessed Land and the other at the Burial River, the Golden Bridge had successfully appeared in the floating river. Each time, it was more stable than the last. This was especially the second time he had crossed the Burial River. Chen Pinggan already had the confidence to cross it. However, as soon as he thought about the longevity bridge and the need to refine the 5 elements magic treasures as objects to guard his home, Chen Pinggan felt a headache coming on. With the incantations from the water goddess, Chen Pinggan had to immediately begin his preparations. This meant that Chen Pinggan would have to refine as many as 5 lifebound items. Otherwise, once the longevity bridge was built, it would be equivalent to a dead end. Unless he abandoned his martial cultivation, once the longevity bridge was built, the spiritual energy would flow in like seawater. The consequences would be unimaginable. However, if his chi dwelling possessed 5 lake-shaped immortal mansions, he would be able to accumulate the spiritual energy of the world. At the same time, it wouldn't affect his pure Jinchi too much as he patrolled the surroundings. Both sides would generally be able to mind their own business. This mysterious state was like a Chen Pinggan who traveled the world with his fists, and a Chen Pinggan who cultivated in seclusion deep in the mountains and forests. While Chen Pinggan was walking, he thought to himself, the water word seal that Mr. Chi gave me must be refined into a lifebound item. In this way, it will be linked to my life. Even if it is broken like the mountain word seal, as long as I don't die, it will still faintly appear in my chi dwelling. Even if it no longer has any power, I will still have a memory. In this life, as long as I want to see it, I will be able to see it. Furthermore, Lady Water God's immortal Dharma art mentioned the matter of refining water the most. As for the ancient jade slip that can nourish the body and spirit, it is most likely related to the water element. However, I don't know its specific rank and background. I still have to ask Wei Pai. It's a pity that the golden robe isn't part of the 5 elements. Otherwise, Its rank would be high enough and it would be suitable for refining. I wouldn't have to wear it all the time. The nascent soul stage Earth immortals would immediately see through it. Sigh, it's really a pity. When I was talking about the sequence of knowledge in the Bio Mansion, I had a feeling that the golden script gallbladder of the city god of Tsai Nation, Shun Wen, could be refined into the gold element of the 5 elements. Moreover, studying is the same as the fist art and sword art. It is a lifelong effort. The earth element of the 5 elements that I entrusted to the Daoist child talked about the earth element of the 5 mountains of Dali. Now that the Dali Iron Cavalry is heading south, the flames of war are raging. Could it be that the Song clan can really take over half of the entire Aquarius continent? If that's the case, the earth element of the 5 mountains of the Dali dynasty is indeed valuable. It seems that the next time I return to Longquan, I will still have to trouble Wei Pai, who is already the god of the North Mountains of Dali. Chen Pingan, who was dressed in a white robe, forgot himself as he punched. It was exceptionally smooth. He was no longer a kill worker's apprentice who was old-fashioned and crafty like a regular script. He was now like a master's unconventional writing. The essence of it was to be able to endure hardships and grasp the fortune. The 4 people in the picture all had their own quirks. Recently, Wei Xian had taken a liking to eating. Hanging on his waist were 2 small bags filled with food that he bought from various shops. Lu Baixiong liked all kinds of elegant things. He liked to hold a few chess pieces in his hands. When he took a walk, the chess pieces would rub against each other. His palms would produce a slight squeaking sound. Zhu Lian did not like to be restrained. For example, he felt that it was troublesome to wear boots and socks. He bought a pair of straw sandals from somewhere in Crane Riding City and changed into a light yellow hemp robe. Furthermore, no matter which town they stopped at, Zhu Lian would buy a few novels about supernatural beings and demons, or novels about scholars and beauties. Whenever he had free time, he would flip through the books to pass the time. Other than comprehending the sword every day, Sui Yuyu did not seem to have any other hobbies. This was his biggest quirk. When Chen Pingan finished practicing, he returned to the house. Today, Zhu Lian was basking in the early winter sun in the courtyard, reading an erotic novel about a scholar and a beauty. The young man Yaro Xian Ji came to visit to ask for guidance on fist techniques. Lu Baixiong was playing chess with Yaro Jin Ji. After Sui Yuyu went to the small mountain, his aura changed slightly. He went into seclusion again, holding his sword horizontally across his knees. He would often pull his sword out of its sheath and then pull it back. Pei Qian was someone who was unwilling to stop playing chess. After watching Lu Baixiang and Yaro Jinji play chess for a while, she felt bored and went back to her room to grab the mountain walking staff. Next to Wei Xian and Yaro Shenji, she waved her signature crazy demon staff technique. Wei Xian had Yaro Shenji practice a fist stance first. He looked at Pei Qian for a long time without saying anything. The little girl held the mountain staff in a disorderly manner. Sometimes she would accidentally hit herself. It was worthy of being called a tyrannical style that killed 1,000 enemies but lost 800 men. Yaro Jinji, who was practicing his stance, rolled his eyes. Wei Xian did not seem to think that the charcoal girl was childish. Pei Qian gasped for breath. She bent over and held the mountain staff with both hands. She asked, "Old Wei, how is my talent in martial arts? Is it 1 in 10,000? Tomorrow? Forget it. Next year, can I become a peerless expert like my father? Can I beat 10 of you with one hand?" Wei Xian did not answer her question. In the martial arts world, it is said that practicing the spear takes years. If you really want your staff technique to improve by leaps and bounds, I have 2 suggestions. The first is to go to the rape fields and use your staff like a dragon. After a long time, you will have an invincible aura. The second is to poke a hornet's nest. When you are in danger, you will have an aura that is not afraid of death. Pei Qian saw that Wei Xian was sincere. After thinking for a while, she asked, "You're not lying to me?" Wei Xian said indifferently, "If you don't believe me, then forget it." Lu Baixiong, who had his back to the courtyard, smiled. Zhu Lian, who was reading a book with his back bent, had just dipped his finger in his saliva and turned a page. However, The previous page was about the love between a man and a woman. It was too erotic, so he couldn't help but turn it back and admire it again. Pei Qian suddenly shook his head and sighed. With a pitiful gaze, he said, "Old Wei, can't you see that what I practice is not staff techniques, but swordsmanship?" Wei Xian pretended to be surprised, but there was no sincerity in it. Pei Qian flew into a rage out of humiliation and said, "Old Wei, if you continue to be so boring, the friendship between us will be gone." The corner of Wei Xian's mouth twitched. He seemed to be taking pleasure in Pei Qian's misfortune. As soon as the words came out of his mouth, Pei Qian threw away the mountain walking staff and hurriedly covered his mouth. As expected, Chen Pingan's voice sounded, "Go back to your room and copy 500 words." Nowadays, in addition to memorizing books, Pei Qian was also asked to copy books by Chen Pingan. Every time Pei Qian clenched his teeth and copied books, he wished he could give himself 2 slaps. Why did he have to ask that flowery ghost from the Bayou mansion for a pen and paper? In the end, Chen Pingan said that since he had his own pen, he should start practicing calligraphy every day. It wasn't much, just 500 words. However, if any word was too sloppy or crooked, it wouldn't be included in the 500 and would have to be replaced. Pei Qian even had the thought of dying. How many days had it been since he had last lived a carefree life? Pei Qian puffed up his cheeks like a big meat bun. He picked up the mountain walking staff and obediently went back to his room to copy books. At this moment, the courtyard was filled with joy and harmony. 100 miles away from Riding Crane City, within the jurisdiction of a small mountain temple, because the annual incense money was too much, the mountain god's residence was built like an immortal's residence. In these 2 days, the residence was filled with guests, bringing light to the humble dwelling. The little mountain god personally served as a servant, serving tea and water, attentively serving those nobles. The first to arrive here was a genuine immortal from the mountain, accompanied by 2 young female cultivators who were as beautiful as fairies. The master of the Golden Peak Monastery, Du Hanling, was a famous nascent soul stage earth immortal. The Golden Peak Monastery was located in a beautiful place in the northern part of the Tongyi continent. With such a great background, not to mention this kind of mediocre mountain god temple, even the emperor of the Great Spring Dynasty might not necessarily be able to invite this old immortal master to come. At first, the mountain god was so scared that the golden body of the temple almost became unstable. However, after receiving the decree personally issued by Du Hanling, he said that he was only borrowing this place to entertain a friend and that he would return the favor after the matter was settled. The mountain god immediately felt at ease. Old immortal Du would not play tricks on him. A small mountain god like him was not worthy. Soon after, an old official with an air of nobility and a few retainers came. They were all Qi refinement warriors who had achieved success in their cultivation. Then, a young Daoist priest with a jade-like face quietly climbed the mountain, followed by a pair of master and disciple. The old man's realm was not high, and he was seriously injured. The disciple was a tall young man with a simple and honest appearance. Finally, the immediate superior of the little mountain god appeared in the middle of the night. It was the Lord Xing Wang of the provincial city's Xing Wang Pavilion. His official position was similar to the provincial governor in the world of the living. He was in charge of all the Xing Wang temples in a province. As for the civil and martial temples, they were an exception. They were directly under the Ministry of Rights of a country. The 2 temples and the Xing Wang temple had never interfered with each other. As for who was higher in rank, who was more powerful, who was in charge of the affairs in an emergency, there were different situations in different places. The master of the Golden Peak Monastery, Du Hanling, the Great Spring Duke, Gao Shizhen, and the Lord Xing Wang of Riding Crane City. In addition, there was Xiao Yuan Ran, who was both a disciple of the Golden Peak Temple and a consecrator of the Great Spring Liu clan. The winter day was warm and the scenery was pleasant. The 4 of them gathered at a viewing pavilion on the top of the mountain. The mountain god stood far away, waiting for orders. At the pavilion, they were chatting happily. After Duke Shen Jiao Shizhen went down the mountain, he returned to the Great Springs capital, Mirage City. He was no longer depressed and gloomy like he was on the way. Lord Xing Wang quietly returned to the tallest building in the city, the Xing Wang Pavilion. He stared at the post house with a cold gaze and a mocking smile. Du Hanling stayed on the mountain for one more day. Before he left, he summoned his disciple, Daoist Baozhen Yin Miaofeng, and his grand disciple Xiao Yuan Ran. The master and disciple were now in the Dragon Gate realm. Therefore, they could not stay in Mirage City as first-class consecrators. Instead, they were stationed at the border to monitor the Yarrow family's cavalry for the Great Spring Liu clan. In addition to giving Xiao Yuan Ran an important treasure of the sect in advance, it could be considered as giving Xiao Yuan Ran the reward of entering the Golden Core realm in advance. The Earth Immortal Du Hanling also told him a secret. Xiao Yuan Ran, who had a calm temperament, could not hide his joy. Yin Miaofeng was grinning from ear to ear. He stood up and thanked his master respectfully on behalf of his disciple. Du Hanling praised Xiao Yuan Ran a few words and then flew to the north to return to the Golden Peak Temple. Before he left, he did not forget to give the mountain god a good quality spiritual weapon. The mountain god was naturally grateful. After old immortal Du flew away, he knelt on the top of the mountain and kowtowed, thanking him from afar. In fact, the mountain god's almost humble and flattering etiquette seemed exaggerated. In fact, it was no wonder that the mountain god had no strength of character. The spiritual weapon was not the most important thing. To be able to climb up the Golden Peak Temple and get to know a nascent soul realm Earth Immortal was the biggest blessing of the mountain god's small temple. From now on, how could the evaluation of Lord Xing Wang in Riding Crane City be bad? The young Daoist Xiao Yuan Ran and his disciple stayed on the mountain to recuperate. The old Daoist Yin Miaofeng and Xiao Yuan Ran did not enter the city at the same time. They returned to the city's post house one after the other. In a quiet house on the mountain, the tall teenager who broke into the martial temple to borrow a knife had a complicated expression. He sat on the beautiful stool next to the sickbed. His hands were clenched into fists, as if he was thinking about a problem that he could not figure out. His master was lying on the bed, recuperating. Although his injuries were not light, it was already an extravagant hope for him to fight and slay demons. However, it was not difficult for him to walk on the ground. The old man's face was slightly pale, but his spirit was very good. His eyes were bright and he turned to look at his only disciple. It is difficult to accept a good disciple, but it is also difficult for the disciple to cultivate smoothly. It is not as simple as taking care of the children in the family. I have no children, and you are my only disciple. Moreover, your talent is much better than mine. If I do not plan for your future, as your master, I will not die in peace. The old man smiled and said, I've already explained the reason and the process to you. As for how Master knew about the Golden Peak Temple and why you met Spiritual Master Xiao just now, don't ask too much. From today onwards, just focus on cultivating diligently. Old Immortal Du personally helped you break the bottleneck, allowing you to enter the middle 5 realms. You must remember this kindness in your heart. To put it bluntly, the Golden Peak Temple is a big immortal's cave. Even if you sincerely want to repay the kindness, do they need it? However, you still have to have this intention. Otherwise, you will not be qualified to be a dog of the Golden Peak Temple. The tall teenager's eyes were moist. He lowered his head and said, I am useless. I have wronged you, Master. The old man sighed and stretched out his finger to point at the blockhead. You still haven't been enlightened. Forget it. If not, I wouldn't have only accepted you as my disciple. To be honest, even if I had seen Immortal Xiao Xiao's amazing aptitude earlier, I might not have dared to accept him as my disciple. Once he encounters the wind and clouds, how can I, a practitioner of the viewing sea realm, control him? The tall teenager was still competitive. Master, I also have some hope of entering the Dragon Gate realm at such a young age. The old man laughed and scolded, Idiot. Go out and cultivate. I have to be injured. I don't want to play the lute to a cow. Oh, the tall youth said, stood up, and left. When the teenager walked to the door, the old cultivator comforted him softly. On the road of cultivation, some grievances are inevitable. I am afraid that you can only accumulate grievances for a lifetime. Therefore, you must go higher and further than your master. You can let yourself suffer less grievances. The mountain temple and viewing pavilion here are not high. It is also not far from the Tongyi continent to the Great Quan dynasty. In this world, the gods are only at higher places. The tall teenager turned his head and nodded, I will remember. The old cultivator smiled, if it is possible, when your realm is high in the future, there will be a day when you can be on equal footing with someone like old Immortal Do at that time. Remember to treat the ordinary people at the foot of the mountain better. The teenager who had been unhappy all this time smiled brightly at this moment. He followed his heart and nodded vigorously. The old man laughed. You are really an idiot. The day before leaving for the Mirage City, someone came to visit Chen Pingan. It was a young daoist wearing a daoist robe and a hibiscus crown. He was travel-worn and was drinking a bowl of herbal tea in Chen Pingan's room. He said that he was the closest to the riding crane city. Fortunately, he received a decree from his ancestor to send something to Chen Pingan. The young daoist from the Peace Mountain carefully took out a jade plate. After putting the jade plate on the table, he explained the origin of the jade plate to Chen Pingan. The young daoist said bluntly, My ancestor asked me to tell you that young Master Chen does not need to worry that the Peace Mountain will do something to the jade plate and leak your whereabouts, which will be known by us. The restriction on the jade plate has been removed by my ancestor. Young Master Chen is just an object made of good material. Of course, it has a special meaning to outsiders. Therefore, I hope that before you leave the Tongyi continent, young Master Chen can be a little troublesome and hang it on your waist every day. Chen Pingan stood up and thanked him. The daoist of the Peace Mountain quickly stood up and bowed back. Chen Pingan put away the jade plate and hung it on his waist, one on the left and one on the right of the blade-strengthening gourd. They sent the young daoist who announced his name and walked into the post house to the gate. The Peace Mountain did this with good intentions. The jade plate on Chen Pingan's waist was a direct disciple of the Peace Mountain Ancestral Master Hall. The words Peace Mountain cultivates me and Ancestral Master Hall continues incense were engraved on both sides. Even the golden core and nascent soul earth immortals of the Peace Mountain might not be able to hang it. Because it had nothing to do with cultivation and age. In the entire Peace Mountain, there were only 5 or 6 people who wore the jade plate. The oldest one was already 300 years old. He was in charge of the daoist book collection in the Peace Mountain. He was only in the Dragon Gate realm. The youngest one was a 7 or 8-year-old daoist child. He was very talented. But the most famous one was definitely the female daoist Huang Ting, who went down the mountain alone with a sword. Therefore, from this moment on, Chen Pingan's protective talisman in the Tongyi continent was the entire Peace Mountain. And the ancestral master of the Peace Mountain, the old heavenly lord, had just performed an impressive immortal divine power. The golden body Dharma form appeared, holding the bright moon mirror and riding the immortal sword to kill the enemy from 10,000 miles away. At this moment, who would dare to provoke the Peace Mountain? Chen Pingan felt very emotional and walked back to the courtyard. He was wearing a white robe, with a jade hairpin in his hair and a jade plate hanging on his waist. The official of the post house saw Chen Pingan on the way and thought that he was a scholar. The Yarrow family's team set off for the Mirage City in the early morning. The closer they were to the famous ferry in the Mirage City, the closer it was to the departure time of Chen Pingan and the Yarrow family's team. One evening, the Yarrow family stayed at the last post house for this trip. The post house was simple and unadorned. It was very different from the post house in the riding crane city that was surrounded by gardens. Walking along the official road outside the post house for more than 10 miles, there was a Jiaoping Peak. Although it was not high, it was like an unsheathed sword. It was very suitable for watching the sunrise and sunset. It was a famous place in the capital. High officials and nobles often stayed at the top of the mountain to watch the sunrise of the Eastern Sea and the Reflection Mountain. Where ENA's made. Her. P. Yarrow Zhan insisted on dragging Chen Pingan to the Jiaoping Peak. Other than San Yarrow, he did not allow any other cultivators to follow. In the end, only the old general, San Yarrow, Chen Pingan, and Pei Qian went to the Jiaoping Peak and stayed at one of the inns on the top of the mountain. Behind the inns was a cliff facing the east. It was the best place to enjoy the scenery of the 6 inns on the Jiaoping Peak. The group took the fine wine and supper from the inns and placed them on the table. They first admired the moon and then the sunrise. The young Yarrow Xianji accompanied Pei Qian, who was holding the mountain walking staff, to fool around. The two of them were busy comparing notes on martial arts. The young Yarrow Lingji walked alone to the railing of the cliff and gazed towards the south. She seemed a little sad. The old general vowed that he would stay up until sunrise. However, after drinking 2 pots of wine, he was drunk before he could make Chen Pinggan drunk. Yarrow Jinji and Yarrow Lingji could only support their grandfather back to the inns. Pei Qian and Yarrow Xianji were in good spirits. They would definitely be able to wait until sunrise. Chen Pinggan sat alone at the table. He took the mountain walking staff that Pei Qian had thrown to the side and drew circles on the ground beside his feet in boredom. A small circle, a big circle, an even bigger circle, and then an even bigger circle. Layer by layer, the circles wound around each other. Chen Pinggan's mind was immersed in it. Yarrow Jinji was already standing behind Chen Pinggan. After watching for a long time, she asked, "Why aren't you continuing to draw?" Chen Pinggan put away the mountain walking staff and leaned against the stone table. He smiled and said, "I can only draw up to here." Yarrow Jinji sat down and poured herself a cup of wine. After entering the inns, she took off her veiled hat. As she drank, her face was wrinkled. It seemed that the wine was very difficult to swallow. After drinking, she glanced at the ground and said, "It is very difficult to continue drawing. I'm guessing that even a Confucian gentleman wouldn't be able to continue." Chen Pinggan shook his head and didn't say anything. He only looked at the railing of the cliff. Yarrow Xianji and Pei Qian, one adult and one child, were sneakily discussing something. Yarrow Jinji smiled and asked, "You're not going to ask me if I really know what you're drawing or if I'm just pretending?" Chen Pinggan said softly, "Miss Yarrow probably knows." Yarrow Jinji hesitated for a moment, but still poured herself a cup of wine. She drank it in one gulp. Her face was crimson and became more dazzling. She slowly said, "Between you and me, between the sects, between countries, between continents, between literary lineages, between the 3 sects, between hundreds of schools of knowledge. Between the world and the world, between the human race and the demon race. You, Chen Pinggan, are thinking about the principles you know. How many circles can the word principles contain? Then you will go around the outermost circle until you determine the boundary of the next circle. Then you will cross it and continue to walk. Only in this way can you walk with a clear conscience. Although it will be very tiring to deal with people, your heart will not be tired at all. Therefore, as long as you use your fists and sword, you can go forward with indomitable will. Only you, Chen Pinggan, are qualified to speak to the gentleman of the academy in the inn and ask your conscience." Chen Pinggan turned his head and looked at the girl. He nodded and said, "Miss Yao, you're one of the smartest people I've ever met." This was the truth. If he didn't say one of the smartest, it would be boasting against his heart. After all, not to mention others, just his own disciple Kui Dongshan was not comparable to Yarrow Jinji now. Yarrow Jinji had probably drunk 2 cups of wine and was not very strong. In her words and expression, there was a different kind of flirtatious feeling. She stared at Chen Pinggan and asked softly, "In your eyes, is there only intelligence?" Chen Pinggan was stunned and scratched his head. "Miss Yao, I have a girl I like." Yarrow Jinji covered her mouth and smiled. She was not angry at all. Instead, she asked, "Is she beautiful?" All of a sudden, Chen Pinggan was in high spirits and said without hesitation, "All the beautiful mountains and beautiful rivers in the world added together are not as beautiful as her." Yarrow Jinji didn't seem to have any grudges. She smiled and drank a mouthful of wine. After sitting with Chen Pinggan for half an hour and chatting about the local customs of Mirage City, she got up and left. After turning around, this beautiful girl walked to the inn, her eyes dark and gloomy. Chen Pinggan didn't turn his head. He always put his elbows on the table and smiled at the distant moon. His eyes were gentle as if he was looking at a girl and couldn't tolerate any more beauty in the world. The girl he liked was both a cinnabar mole in his heart and a bright moonlight. 1. 353. In the end, only Chen Pinggan, Pei Qian, and Yarou Xianji saw the sunshine screen peak. Pei Qian's eyes were wide open. He leaned on the railing and stared at the sun. It was as if he had seen a huge piece of gold and wanted to put it in his pocket. Yarou Xianji was stunned for a moment and didn't look much. After all, he had seen it countless times. The moon-surging river and the stars hanging over the plains in his hometown weren't inferior to this sunrise. This genius youth was a little surprised. Why didn't Pei Qian's eyes hurt after staring at the sun for so long? Chen Pinggan lightly jumped and sat on the railing. Yarou Xianji had wanted to do this for a long time, but last night, his grandfather and sister were present, so he didn't dare to be rash. Later, Chen Pinggan, who he admired the most, was sitting at the stone table, so he was embarrassed. Now that Chen Pinggan took the lead, Yarou Xianji hurriedly followed and accompanied Chen Pinggan to look at the East Sea. It was as if their mental state had opened up and they were filled with longing and hope for their future life in Mirage City. When they went down the mountain, the old general's face was full of annoyance. He complained that Chen Pinggan was not kind. Before sunrise, Chen Pinggan didn't even greet him. He missed the magnificent scenery and walked so much up the mountain in vain. Chen Pinggan ignored Yarou Zhen. Yarou Jinji said, "Grandfather, I made an exception and allowed you to drink last night. Are you still not satisfied?" The old general immediately stopped. Whether it was Yarou Zhen or Yarou Xianji, they were the closest to Chen Pinggan. They knew that they would have to say goodbye to him soon. When they were about to leave, there were other worries in their hearts. It's just that the old and the young were both warriors and generals who were used to drinking the wind and sand of the battlefield. They were a little worried about parting, but they could just relax. In the future they would have the opportunity to meet again to drink wine. Imitating that young lady's pretentious act would be laughable. Finally, they arrived at the Peach Leaf Ferry outside Mirage City. The Yarou family stopped the carriage. Chen Pinggan was carrying the bamboo box. The saber-wielding girl, Yarou Lingji, cupped her fists and thanked Chen Pinggan. "Young Master Chen, I wish you a smooth journey to the north. I wish you the best of luck." Chen Pinggan nodded with a smile and reminded her, "You can't be impatient when it comes to martial arts. The more talented you are, the more you can't just focus on breaking through to the next realm. Fist techniques are all about being able to retract and release freely. If you want your body to be light and your fist intent to be heavy, you have to have a good foundation. Dripping water can penetrate a stone, and the stone is a great enemy. This dripping water is the true meaning of your martial arts. Miss Lingji, as long as you can settle down, you will definitely be able to achieve great things." Yarou Lingji snorted coldly, but there was a smile in his eyes as he said, "You're not much older than me, but you act like an old man." The girl shook her head and left. Yarou Zhen didn't say much and only said, "Take care." The bamboo brush holder engraved with a sage's essay had been carefully put away by the old man. He had made up his mind to keep it as a family heirloom. Yesterday, Yarou Xianji had shamelessly asked Chen Pinggan for a copy of his calligraphy, treating it as the world's #1 treasure. Today, the young man did not say much. He only said that he hoped that young Master Chen would come to Mirage City in the future. Yarou Jinji, who was wearing a veil hat, unexpectedly said that he wanted to walk with Chen Pinggan alone on the Peach Leaf Crossing. Yarou Xianji whistled and was hit on the waist by Yarou Lingji. The young man was in so much pain that he broke out in a cold sweat. Yarou Jinji's eyes were sharp. He saw the jade token on Chen Pinggan's waist. It was slightly different from before. It was flipped over. Before leaving Riding Crane City and arriving at the Peach Leaf Crossing, Chen Pinggan's jade token only showed the side ancestral hall continues incense. Today, it showed the 6 ancient words Taiping Mountain cultivates me. Yarou Jinji's thoughts moved slightly. He looked deeply at the young man who came from Beijing country to the capital of Great Spring. She said some polite words. There was nothing special about it, but it made people feel that her feelings were sincere. It was especially moving. However, Chen Pinggan did not appreciate her kindness. Only the two of them knew the meaning behind it. In the end, Yarou Jinji casually talked to Chen Pinggan about the origin of the Ji in the name of the Yarou family. It turned out that there was a fortune teller who wandered the border in the early years. Unfortunately, He encountered a war and was saved by his grandfather, Yarrow Jun. Then, he did a divination for the Yarrow family. In the divination, he mentioned that among the ancestors of the Yarrow family, there was an extraordinary person. The Ji character was that person's natal character. Moreover, it was naturally compatible with Yarrow Jun's grandchildren. As long as everyone had the Ji character, they could benefit from the glory of their ancestors. They could help to hide the wind and gather water. Maybe one of the juniors could rely on the protection of their ancestors and have an unimaginable future. Yarrow Jun did not think too much about it. He just thought that it was a good idea. Therefore, he added the Ji character to the names of Yarrow Jinji and the other children. In the Yarrow family, there were more than 20 people. Everyone had the Ji character. Yarrow Jun was not biased. Among them, the 3 Yarrow family members by Yarrow Jun's side were the most outstanding. After Chen Pinggan heard this, he seemed to have understood something. Yarrow Jinji finally gave Chen Pinggan a curtsy, graceful and charming. Chen Pinggan cupped his fists in return. After hesitating for a moment, he said sincerely, "Miss Jinji, in Mirage City, other than helping the old general to come up with plans and strategies and guarding against all kinds of villains, you also have to pay attention to your own safety. I'll say something offensive, but if in the future you encounter a hurdle that Miss Yarrow thinks you can't overcome, you might as well ask the old general and let him make the decision. You don't have to take everything to heart and bear it alone." For the first time, Yarrow Jinji took off her veil hat and smiled sweetly. However, she did not say anything. She just looked at Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan cupped his fists in farewell again. Yarrow Jinji was a lady from a big family, but she also cupped her fists in the same manner as the people of Jianghu. Her pair of watery eyes were filled with a strange brilliance. She said in a clear voice, "The Green Mountain does not change, the green water flows forever." Chen Pinggan could only follow and say, "We'll meet again someday." Yarrow Jinji had not drunk the wine, but her cheeks were already pink. In the distance, Zhu Lian said with a smile, "It's hard to bear the kindness of a beauty. Amorous eyes are the most attractive." Sui Yu stood with his sword on his back, ignoring them. Chen Pinggan returned to his side. Pei Qian carried a bag and held a walking stick. For the rest of the journey, there were no more carriages to sit in. However, she was eager to try. What was there to be afraid of? Otherwise, wouldn't the calluses on the soles of her feet be in vain? Chen Pinggan waved goodbye to the Yarrow family's group. Yarrow Shenji, who was riding a horse, raised her butt high and waved back at Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan and his group continued to head north. He sighed softly, "It's a pity that it didn't snow heavily. Otherwise, we could climb Jiaoping Peak again and see what kind of paradise Mirage City is." Pei Qian smiled and said, "Then shall we wait until it snows?" For the past 2 days, she had been by Yarrow Jinji's side all day long. She kept calling her fairy sister and tried her best to please the beautiful woman who didn't dare to show her face in her heart. After that, Yarrow Jinji indeed gave her a parting gift. It was placed in a small wooden box with many treasures. Inside it were a few pieces of antiques from the previous dynasty that she had painstakingly collected. There was also a simple wooden carved ganoderma. Together with the others, there were more than 10 pieces scattered around. At first, Pei Qian wanted to swindle a few taels of silver. Chen Pinggan wouldn't stop her. It wasn't heavy for her to carry it herself. However, Yarrow Jinji gave her such a big problem. Pei Qian didn't dare to make a decision on her own. It was Yarrow Jinji who held Pei Qian's hand and handed the box to Chen Pinggan. He explained that the box was filled with rare but not expensive items and hoped that Chen Pinggan wouldn't refuse. Chen Pinggan wanted to refuse or just pick one of the items. However, Yarrow Jinji insisted. Chen Pinggan could only accept it for Pei Qian and put it in the bamboo box. Pei Qian wasn't unhappy about this at all. Instead, she saw it as a matter of course. It was a big wooden box and heavy. If she put it in her bag and carried it to Tianqiu Peak, wouldn't she be tired to death? At this moment, she was encouraging Chen Pinggan to go to Mirage City to wait for the snow to fall. At the same time, she was happily thinking about how she might be able to get the real money that she coveted the most. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Then why don't we leave you in Mirage City? Pei Qian shook the bag and held the mountain walking stick tightly. She said righteously, I suddenly feel that it's more important to hurry up. Chen Pinggan said to the four people, we didn't ask the Yarrow family for a war horse. We can only walk to Tianqiu Peak's immortal ferry. Zhu Lian immediately smiled and said, walking more can strengthen your muscles and bones. There was a small boat with a black canopy in the Peach Leaf Crossing River. It was very far from the Yarrow family's team. The master of Golden Peak Monastery, Du Hanling, slowly withdrew her jade-white palm and said to a young female cultivator beside her, go and tell Dukshan not to provoke Chen Pinggan. This person is a direct disciple of the ancestral hall of Taiping Mountain. If he is killed, not only will the Great Spring Dynasty suffer, even our Golden Peak Monastery will be destroyed. The female cultivator stood up and left. She left behind a female cultivator who continued to brew tea for the ancestral hall. She was a female cultivator after all, and her skin was whiter than snow. The nascent soul stage Earth Immortal sat quietly and said with indifferent eyes, failed at the last step. Because there were very few of them, Chen Pinggan's jade tablet of Taiping Mountain's ancestral hall was only circulated among the larger immortal mansions on the mountain. However, ordinary Earth Immortals, whether Jindan or nascent soul, would know the inside story. After all, that woman, Huang Ting, had caused many sects to suffer in the early years. It was just that there was no news of her in the past 60 years. It was unknown whether she was in seclusion to break through the realm or was restrained by the ancestral hall in Taiping Mountain. Provoking Taiping Mountain now was even crazier than provoking Tongye sect and Yugui sect in the past. Du Hanling also did not dare to. Moreover, he was just doing a small business with Dukshan's mansion and Jiao Shuzhen behind the scenes. It would be best if he killed Chen Pinggan. It did not matter if he did not kill Chen Pinggan, as it would not hinder the overall plan of Golden Peak Mountain. However, Jiao Shuzhen would probably jump and curse. But what was it to Golden Peak Monastery and Du Hanling? The affairs of the mortal world were small. How big could the emperor be? The Earth Immortal of nascent soul realm pondered for a brief moment. The current situation was chaotic, and some of the chess pieces of Golden Apex Monastery had already taken root in various places. Therefore, he should try to take another step forward, as his current cultivation base was still insufficient. As for whether Jiao Shuzhen would madly pursue that young man, it had nothing to do with the Golden Peak Monastery that had already left. Ancestral Master, should I secretly remind Chen Pinggan? The young female cultivator asked softly, but quickly denied herself. Drawing legs on a snake, going too far is as bad as falling short. Du Hanling smiled and shook his head. It's not that you can't, it's just that the time is not right. And even if you want to be a good person, it should be Xiao Yuanran, not you. The female cultivator smiled. Ancestral Master is wise. Du Hanling dismissed it with a smile. Without needing Chen Pinggan to say it himself, Yarozhen gave Chen Pinggan a geomancy map of the Great Spring North region, as well as 2 more detailed maps of the provinces and counties. Thus, Chen Pinggan already had a rough idea of the route to Heavenly Fault Peak. The group left the official road and walked on a yellow dirt road. Pei Qian had a yellow paper talisman on his forehead. Holding a walking stick, he walked like the wind. Pei Qian had nothing to do. Old Wei, after you eat too much, do you fart? Wei Xian ignored him. Pei Qian went to bother others. Little Bai, why haven't I seen you shit before? It's not good for you to keep it in your stomach. Lu Baixiang was speechless. Pei Qian ran to Sui Yoyo's side, raised his head, and said with a flattering face, Sister Sui, can you fly? I often listen to the storytellers under the overpass tell stories. They say that not only can immortals leap over roofs and vault over walls, but they can also cast beans to form soldiers and ride the clouds. That old man cheated me of my wine. I don't believe him, but I believe you, Big Sister Sui. I've seen someone fly on a sword. Big Sister Sui, you're so pretty, so you must be able to do it too, right? When I grow up, if I can be half as beautiful as Sister Sui, I'll be happy to death. Sui Yuyu laughed at this little flatterer. Pei Qian finally returned to Chen Pinggan's side and said with inexplicable emotion, when I was in my hometown, I always thought that if you could eat enough soil without dying, then it would be the happiest thing in the world. Chen Pinggan said, I read in a book that there's a mountain north of Tongya continent. The guanine soil there can really be eaten. Pei Qian was shocked. Can soil really be eaten? Should we carry a basket of it? Chen Pinggan shook his head. It's not on the way. Pei Qian's mind always had strange thoughts. For example, she would seriously ask Chen Pinggan if he felt that every house, every tree, was like a person. Her reason was that the windows were the eyes of the house, and the door was the mouth of the house. The leaves were the clothes of the trees. Chen Pinggan asked, then why are the trees not wearing clothes when the winter is so cold, and why do they wear so much when the summer is so hot? That's right. Pei Qian scratched her head. She felt that Chen Pinggan was more knowledgeable, so it made more sense. Along the way, besides Pei Qian's occasional nonsense, Chen Pinggan and the four of them did not have much conversation. It was incredible that the 5 people walking were actually the 5 number 1 under heaven in the history of lotus flower-blessed land. As Chen Pinggan walked, he repeatedly chewed on the refining formula on the jade slip. While walking on the green stone road in the forest, Zhu Lian asked softly, Young master, what do you think? Lu Baixiang and the other 2 walked as usual, but at the same time they felt something strange. Chen Pinggan said, no rush. This time, they deliberately avoided a part of the Great Spring Northern Border Army's territory and took more mountain roads. But today, someone finally gave the game away. But where did they come from? Was it a chance encounter at the border? Did they have to come here because they were afraid of the 5 of them? Or was it premeditated and targeted at Chen Pinggan? It was hard to say. On this evening, it was drizzling, and the mountain road was difficult to travel. In the wilderness where there were few people, they came across a dilapidated temple that had been abandoned for many years. Pei Qian was overjoyed. She finally had a place to shelter herself from the wind and rain. Her boots and trousers were covered with mud. Every time she lifted her feet, she felt like she was lifting several kilograms. Even though she was holding an oil paper umbrella, the wind and rain still made her hair stick to her forehead. It was very uncomfortable. Chen Pinggan asked Pei Qian to stop. He took out a Yang Qi lantern lighting talisman and twisted it between his fingers. He took the lead and walked into the empty ruined temple. Talisman? He did not light it. Only then did he let Pei Qian in. There was an old saying in the marketplace, you can sleep in a graveyard, but don't enter a ruined temple. It made sense. Except for robbers and bandits who would kill for money, ruined temples and Taoist temples, what about gods? After the gods disappeared, it was easier to attract ghosts and otherworldly items. They entrenched themselves in the temple and became a place for evil spirits to hide and tolerate evil, bewitching and harming passers-by. When he was traveling with Zhong Shanfeng and Xu Yuanxia in the Baoping continent, he had met a little fox spirit. But demons like that fox spirit were the minority. Most of them coveted the flesh of living people and hated the yang qi of passers-by. The altar in the ruined temple had collapsed. The clay statues were missing. The beams were covered in spider webs of various sizes. Zhu Lian picked up some broken branches, but it was not enough to light a bonfire. He had to go outside to pick up and chop some wet trees. It took him a long time to start a fire. After Pei Qian entered the ruined temple, she immediately had an excuse to ask Chen Pinggan for a talisman. She put it on her forehead and said she was timid and needed a talisman. Exorcism. Now, she could only borrow a talisman after she finished copying 500 words of the sage's essay. She put it on her forehead to show off. Chen Pinggan asked her to use a small branch to write 500 words on the ground. Pei Qian said with a bitter face, "Then I won't put a talisman on it." "Fine, I'm too tired today. Can I copy books next time?" Looking at the pitiful charcoal girl covered in mud, Chen Pinggan nodded. Pei Qian was relieved. She moved closer to Chen Pinggan and asked if she could take a look at the small wooden box that Yao Jinji gave her. It was originally hers. It was just that it was always in Chen Pinggan's bamboo box. Chen Pinggan asked her to take it from the box. Pei Qian carefully took out the exquisite box and sat next to Chen Pinggan. Her back was facing the four of them. She did not even let them take a look at the treasures in the box. This stinginess was probably going to be very difficult to change. Moreover, Chen Pinggan did not seem to deliberately make things difficult for Pei Qian on this matter. Zhu Lian deliberately teased Pei Qian previously and hid the mountain traveling staff that no one could touch. Pei Qian almost fought him to the death. The box was divided into 9 boxes of different sizes. Other than the small and exquisite wooden carved Ganoderma with fine wood grain and the few unique springs from the previous dynasty, there was also a thick and heavy Daoist token. It was carved with the image of a Daoist spiritual official. He had a red face and beard, golden armor, and red robes. There was a celestial eye in the middle of his brows. He looked mighty and vivid. This red token was extremely small. It should be an item that a rich family brought back from the Daoist temple. They let the juniors in the family wear it in the hope that it could exorcise evil spirits and protect their children. The rest were delicate and exquisite female ornaments. Pei Qian secretly raised her head and asked Chen Pinggan, "Which one is the most valuable in here?" Chen Pinggan leaned back slightly and glanced at the dazzling array of items in the box. The wood Ganoderma and the spiritual official token are pretty good spirit weapons. A Qi refinement warrior of the lower 5 realms would be very lucky to have one of them. Pei Qian's eyes lit up. "Then how much is it worth?" Chen Pinggan knocked her with a chestnut. "Others are giving you things out of goodwill. Why are you always thinking about how much they are worth?" Pei Qian shrank her neck and said cautiously, "If it was only me, Sister Jinji would not give me so many things." Chen Pinggan smiled and asked, "You even know this? How can you tell?" Pei Qian reached out and pointed to her eyes. She smiled and said, "With my eyes." Chen Pinggan raised his hand again. Pei Qian was so frightened that she hurriedly covered her head. The box on her legs almost fell to the ground. Chen Pinggan helped her hold the box and did not really hit her. Pei Qian put away the many boxes again. She turned around and sat down. After passing them to Chen Pinggan, she lowered her voice and said, "Sister Jinji is really beautiful. I feel that she is more feminine than a certain someone." Chen Pinggan did not comment. He glanced outside the temple. The rain was getting heavier. Zhu Lian was busy cooking. Chen Pinggan stood up and picked up a branch that was left over from the fire. It was as long as the sword. He stood still at the entrance of the temple and looked up at the rain. Almost at the same time, Zhu Lian and the other 3 turned to look at Chen Pinggan. Even Sui Yuyu, who was sitting cross-legged furthest away, was no exception. After opening his eyes, he placed his hands on one end of the sword. However, Chen Pinggan held the branch as if it was a sword. He did not move it at all. After some time, Sui Yuyu closed his eyes. Zhu Lian continued to light the fire and cook. Wei Xian wandered around the ruined temple. He squatted at the foot of the wall and held a piece of broken stone covered in colorful paint. It was most likely the remains of the temple's broken statue. Lu Baixiang was flipping through a Go manual. It was a gift from Yarou Jinji. It was said that it recorded the master of White Emperor City and the Dali Imperial Tutor Kui. Lu Baixiang loved this Go manual so much that he would take it out and flip through it whenever he had free time. Every time he opened a book, he would read it. While waiting for the rice to be cooked, Zhu Lian took out a crudely printed erotic novel. Pei Qian gathered her courage and wanted to peek, but Zhu Lian pushed her head away. Pei Qian looked at the chess manual in Lu Baixiang's hands. She couldn't understand it, and she wasn't interested. She hated playing chess the most. She had to think about it for a long time. It was too boring. If someone else played a chess piece, she could play 3 or 4 pieces in a row. That would be interesting. When they could smell the aroma of rice, Chen Pinggan said softly, "There's a group of people coming towards the small temple. You guys go about your own business and don't pay attention to them. If you're hungry, eat first." A group of people braved the rain and walked towards the ruined temple to take shelter from the rain. There were more than 10 of them. They wore bamboo hats and straw rain capes. Every one of them had a strong and healthy body and a saber at their waist. Their breathing was steady and long. Chen Pinggan had been with the Yarrow group for a long time. He could tell at a glance that these people were definitely elite soldiers. The leader was a young man in his 30s. He was tall and sturdy. When he walked like a dragon or a tiger. He was more eye-catching than the people behind him. He stood out from the crowd. That person was 10 steps away from the ruined temple. He smiled and asked Chen Pingan, who was holding a tree branch, "Are you the young Master Chen who saved old General Yarrow from the sword cultivators and killed the High Duke Jiao Shui?" Seeing that Chen Pingan did not speak, the person smiled and said, "My name is Liu Tsong. I'm a descendant of the Great Spring Liu family. I've been eating sand at the northern border all these years. After receiving these 2 pieces of news, I thought that I must come and pay you a visit. Previously, my scouts secretly followed you and offended you. I apologize to you here." Liu Tsong, the Great Spring Dynasty's first prince. He held the power of the Northern Border Army and had great prestige in the Great Spring Dynasty's army. In addition to this surname that he had brought with him from his mother's womb, he also relied on his real battle achievements at the border. Chen Pingan asked, "Is that all?" Liu Tsong laughed and said, "Of course not. Young Master Chen, you may not know much about Mirage City. When Jiao Shui was a child, he followed me every day. We had a good relationship for so many years. I'm not sad that you killed him. After all, after I left the capital, he favored the 3rd prince more. But I'm curious about how high your martial arts cultivation is to be able to fight evenly with Li Li, the head of the Imperial Horse Supervisor." Chen Pingan looked around. Liu Tsong stretched out a hand and said, "Not many, just 5,000 soldiers. There are 2,000 elite border army infantry on the mountain and 3,000 at the foot of the mountain. I don't know if this gift is enough, young Master Chen." Chen Pingan felt a little strange. Since there are so many soldiers surrounding you, why do you, a prince, still want to take the risk? There are only 10 steps between you and me. Even if you are a pure warrior with good skills, you don't need to be so careless, do you? Liu Tsong laughed and asked, "Chen Pingan, how old are you this year?" "You are less than 20 years old. Do you know how old I am? I'm 30 years old. Not to mention the physical strength I had in Mirage City, I have just become a warrior of the 6th realm after fighting countless battles at the border. If I were to fight with the palace keeper Huai of the Great Spring Dynasty, I wouldn't even dare to fight with the old eunuch, let alone fight to the death. Don't you think that comparisons are odious?" Chen Pingan asked, "So you came here to seek death?" Liu Tsong held the hilt with one hand and pointed his thumb behind him. He grinned and said, "They are all the most outstanding military cultivators in the north of the Great Spring. You don't care about them at all?" Seeing that the young man with the branch was unwilling to speak, Liu Tsong's eyes were playful. "Some people want the head on your shoulder, some want you to hand over the things of Bio Mansion, and some want the wine gourd on your waist. Chen Pingan, do you really think that a dead gentleman of the Academy and a jade token of the Hall of Founding Masters of Taiping Mountain can let you safely reach Heavenly Fault Peak? You want to swagger away from Tongya Continent on an immortal ferry?" In the ruined temple, Zhu Lian squatted beside the fire with a bowl of rice in his hand. He finished the rice in a few mouthfuls and stood up. Wei Xian chewed the rice slowly and said, "This guy talks too much. He won't live long." Lu Baixiang held the hilt of his sword and walked to the door of the temple. Sui Yu carried his long sword and followed closely behind. Wei Xian handed the remaining half bowl of rice to Pei Qian, who squatted beside him. "Here's your reward." Pei Qian took the bowl of rice and poured it into his own bowl. Then he stacked the bowls on top of each other. He raised his head and said seriously, "Old Wei, if you die, I will definitely help you find a place to bury you. At that time, can I take the money on you as a reward?" Wei Xian held the armor pill and said with a straight face, "It's hard for the 4 of us to die even if we want to." He went straight to Chen Pingan's side and used telepathy to tell him something that he didn't want to talk about. Chen Pingan heard it clearly. The bare-handed Zhu Lian, the narrow saber Lu Baixiang, and the sword Sui on the right could also vaguely hear the contents. They had different expressions. The heavy rain was heavy and the group of people outside could not hear it clearly. Zhu Lian smiled sinisterly. "Young master, after this battle, can you reward me with something good?" Now, out of the four of us, I'm the only one who doesn't have anything. Chen Pinggan said bluntly, I don't have anything to give you for the time being. Zhu Lian felt that it was a pity. He turned to look at the group of uninvited guests and said, Young master, when I kill them later, I won't have to fuss over whether their fist technique is good or not like that night at the inn. Sui Yu stood on the far right with a cold expression. Young master, can the infatuation sword belong to me from now on if it breaks 1,000 pieces of armor? Lu Baixiang stood on the far left and smiled. Lord, if it breaks 1,000 pieces of armor, you can lend it to me for 10 years. Wei Xian was the last to say, I'm tired of killing the armored elite soldiers. All the Qi refinement warriors belong to me. Chen Pinggan smiled. Then what should I do? Pei Qian ate his rice in the ruined temple and said vaguely, Father, accompany me to eat. 1. 354. At the foot of the mountain, Duke Shen, Jiao Shizhen, refused his retainer's umbrella and stood in the rain, allowing the raindrops the size of soybeans to fall on his body. Don't talk to me about loyalty to the country or the country. The Duke Shen's mansion only has one son, Jiao Shuyi. If it's gone, it's gone. Furthermore, he had poured his heart and soul into cultivating this son for more than 20 years. As a father, Jiao Shizhen could not find any fault with Jiao Shuyi in all aspects. Before he received the secret letter from the third prince, he had always believed that Jiao Shuyi would be a pillar of the Great Spring Temple in the future. No matter who sat on the dragon throne, the Duke Shen family would revive their family tradition and have power over the court. They would be promoted to a Junwang manor and become the new emperor's trusted aide. They would swallow up the northern Jin kingdom and the southern Qi kingdom and become the largest dynasty in the central part of the Tongye continent. The emperor said that he would compensate the Duke Shen's mansion. The third prince said that he would compensate Jiao Shizhen. The officials and advisors all advised him to endure. Jiao Shizhen had been very calm during this time. No one could tell that he was a man who had lost his only son. First, he left the imperial palace. Then, he quietly left the prince's mansion. Finally, he secretly left the capital to serve as the emperor's secret envoy. He went to the courier station in Crane City to meet Yaro Zhan. The Duke Shen's mansion was still the righteous Duke Shen's mansion. Jiao Shizhen had never disappointed the old emperor Liu Tsong. Without that opportunity, Jiao Shizhen wouldn't have been able to make waves. After all, Mirage City belonged to the emperor and the Great Spring Dynasty was surnamed Liu. But it was different now. Someone found Jiao Shizhen and he found the first prince Liu Tsong. Liu Tsong found 5,000 armored soldiers. Jiao Shizhen wasn't interested in how many forces he had secretly roped in. Even a lion would use all its strength to hunt a rabbit. It was a military taboo to never add fuel to the fire. Even Jiao Shizhen, a person from the capital who lived like a prince, understood this simple principle. He believed that the first prince Liu Tsong had thought it through even more thoroughly. Jiao Shizhen was waiting. He was waiting for Liu Tsong to give him the head when he went down the mountain so that he could bring it back to his son Jiao Shuyi's new grave. In front of the dilapidated temple, Chen Pinggan looked at the last two people hiding among Liu Tsong's entourage. After sensing Chen Pinggan's gaze, the two of them looked at each other and took a few steps forward. They were the military general Xu Qingju and the immortal master Xu Tong. They were old acquaintances who had fought with Lu Baixiang and Sui Yu at the border inn. Xu Qingju removed his straw raincoat and tossed it aside, revealing his armor. Apart from the standard saber of the Daquan border army, he also had a saber called Daqiao, which was an important weapon of the military. Xu Qingju remained silent while the master of Caomu nunnery, Xu Tong, smiled and said, Mr. Chen, we meet again. Last time, it was at the southern border, and this time, it's at the northern border. Just like General Xu's beloved saber, it's really a big coincidence. Apart from Xu Qingju and Xu Tong, the rest of the 10 entourages behind Liu Tsong were all military cultivators who had been on the battlefield for a long time. The border wars of the Daquan dynasty actually only happened in the northern and southern borders with the northern Jin dynasty and the southern Qi dynasty. In the south, the Yarrow family's iron cavalry guarded the country's gate for the Liu family. In the north, The eldest prince's 120,000 border troops were at war with the southern Qi dynasty all year round. Battles were frequent and they often attacked the northern Qi dynasty. The military general Xu Qingzhou's objective was very clear when he ascended the mountain to encircle Chen Pinggan and his party. He wanted the unusual dew armor. It would be best if he could take the saber as well. Liu Cong only agreed to the armor. As for the saber, he could sell it but not give it away. When the time came, it would depend on how sincere Xu Qingzhou and his family could be to buy it. The laurel immortal master Xu Tong was the master of the Caomu nunnery, the #1 immortal sect in the Daquan realm. He was good at thunder magic and alchemy. He could preserve one's health and live a long life. Because of this, he made friends with countless high-ranking officials and dignitaries. When the spiritual qi flowed out of the robe under the straw raincoat, it glowed with a misty image of colorful cloud scrolls. It looked like a painting of mountains and rivers. In fact, this spiritual weapon robe was called Five Colors Peak. It was the ancestral treasure of the Caomu nunnery and was extremely close to the rank of a magic weapon. Immortal Master Xu Tong wanted Chen Pinggan's golden robe that looked like a golden dragon robe after it reverted to its original form. He coveted it and dreamed of it. Chen Pinggan looked at Liu Cong and asked, "Is it because of that chair?" Liu Cong said sternly, "Otherwise? Do you think the lives of my 5,000 border soldiers are worthless?" At this point, the first prince gnashed his teeth. "If I hadn't come to this rundown temple today, if I hadn't seen you, Chen Pinggan, with my own eyes, I would have." Liu Cong pointed at his chest and said, "I won't be happy." Chen Pinggan said, "You won't be happy? Didn't you ask for it? 5,000 soldiers of the Daquan border army died on this hill. Forget it. In fact, you know the truth. You will probably tell yourself that those who achieve great things don't care about trifles. When you become the emperor, these 5,000 soldiers will be sacrificed for the country and die a worthy death." Chen Pinggan gently waved the withered branch in his hand and said, "Last question. Why do you think that the token on my waist is fake?" Liu Cong chatted for so long, perhaps because he wanted to embolden himself or because he wanted to overcome the hurdle in his heart. Chen Pinggan was willing to talk to Liu Cong about these things because of the last question. It was an important question. The person who wanted his head was definitely Jiao Shizhen, the Duke of Shun. Chen Pinggan had long guessed that the person who wanted the item in the Azure Touring Mansion was the one who wanted the blade-strengthening gourd. After leaving the post house in Riding Crane City, Chen Pinggan hung the jade token on his waist. When he arrived at Peachleaf Ferry, he was about to bid farewell to the Yarrow family. On the same day, Chen Pinggan announced to the world that he was going to cultivate in Taiping Mountain. This was equivalent to revealing his identity as a direct disciple of Taiping Mountain's ancestral hall to Mirage City. He hoped to reduce the pressure on Yarrow Zhan in Great Spring's capital city. If the enemies in Mirage City couldn't even recognize the Jade token, the Yarrow family didn't need to worry. And those who could understand the Jade token were most likely experts who couldn't be underestimated. They would retreat in the face of difficulties. In fact, Du Hanling, the master of the Golden Peak Monastery, who had used the divine man palm to observe the mountains and rivers in the Peachleaf Crossing Black Canopy boat, was among them. As soon as he saw the Jade tablet, even if he provoked the displeasure of the Mirage City, he still insisted on leaving. Liu Cong had a strange look in his eyes and only gave Chen Pinggan half of the answer. This Taiping Mountain's ancestral hall token is real, absolutely real, but at the same time, it's fake. It's actually better if you don't hang it. If you hang it on your waist, I'll return the 2 words to you. You're courting death. Chen Pinggan looked at the Prince of Great Spring, who was getting more and more confident. It was indeed harder to talk to these guys who were born in the royal family. The first one was his neighbor, Song Jisin. Right now, both sides had their own reasons. Although there were right and wrong, Liu Cong and the 5,000 armored soldiers, as well as the hidden Qi refinement warriors and Wu Dao grandmasters, were like arrows on the bowstring that had to be shot. Some kind of general trend was pushing Liu Cong behind the scenes. Chen Pinggan couldn't say that everyone was going to leave peacefully after eating a bowl of rice in the temple. Fighting for the throne had to be done openly. Chen Pinggan didn't want to waste his saliva. If it worked, he was willing to say it. It was just that the other party didn't want to listen. Chen Pinggan picked up the withered branch and pointed at Liu Tsong twice. The hunchbacked old man beside him took the lead and rushed forward. Even if it was a trap, so what? Zhu Lian really wanted to see the conspiracy in this world. Sui Yu, who was standing on the right, and Liu Baixiang, who was standing on the left, rushed out one after another. Wei Xian, who was wearing the deity's due armor, strode forward to catch up with the martial madman who was in front of him. He wouldn't attack for the time being. His main goal was to protect this ruined temple. Chen Pinggan was patient and waited for the other party's trump card. There was a mountain higher than the ruined temple halfway up the mountain. Two people stood at the top of the mountain. It was hard to say whether they were otherworldly experts, but at least they were standing at a very high position. An old man in a Confucian robe didn't have the jade pendant given by the academy on his waist. In the Great Spring Dynasty, no one dared to question him even if he stood on the roof of the Golden Imperial Palace in Mirage City. Beside the old Confucian robe stood a burly man with bulging muscles. He didn't look like a human being. Although it was a serious matter, the old man still asked a question that was suspicious of disrespect. "Your master won't break his promise, right?" The burly man's answer was more straightforward and rude. "I don't dare to talk nonsense about what my master did. If you have the ability, ask my master yourself. The premise is that you have the courage." The old man said to himself, "I'm doing things on the basis of righteousness. After all, it's justified. Even if the academy is blamed by Taiping Mountain and my title is taken away, it doesn't matter." The burly man sneered. "You're a scholar who pretends to be sanctimonious, right?" The old man smiled bitterly and said, "It's great that you can learn from your mistakes. I've read more than 10,000 books and have dabbled in all kinds of knowledge. However, I've missed the teachings of my master." The brawny man did not want to push his luck and continue to mock the old man beside him. If the old man suddenly changed his mind and came to his senses, wouldn't it ruin his master's impromptu plan? Therefore, he comforted him with kind words, "That treasure is so rare. Not to mention that you are tempted and have not hesitated to work so hard for it for so long. In fact, I am also coveting it. After you get it, I will make a deal with you. I will give you the magical equipment that my master gave me. You only need to teach me half of the manual and work for you for 60 years. After the deal is done, you can teach me the remaining half of the manual. How about it?" "How about that?" The old man thought for a while and nodded. "It's a deal." The burly man reminded him, "Before my master left, he told me not to do anything unless it's to save your life. He also told you not to do anything rashly. Even if you do, you should be careful. Otherwise, you'll attract the attention of the sage of the Confucian temple. Although the sage is busy searching for the old ape of Taiping Mountain, once he arrives here, Liu Tsong and the others will be fine, but the two of us will be in big trouble." When the burly man mentioned the sage, especially the two words Confucian temple, the old man's mood dropped even lower. The 72 sages who were worshipping the sage of the Confucian temple in the central divine continent were not to be trifled with. They were not the masters of the 72 academies or the sages of the academies who were respected by the secular dynasties. They were the Confucian sages. The old man's face darkened. He nodded and said, "It's a matter of life and death. Of course, I understand." The wind and rain on the mountaintop were even heavier. However, the raindrops seemed to fall on an invisible umbrella and splashed in all directions above their heads. The burly man yawned. He didn't understand why his master, who was so powerful and influential, would want to make things difficult for that young man. If it were the Tongyi Zong and Yugue Zong of the northern and southern ends of the Chong continent, it would barely make sense. Otherwise, it would be someone like the great gentleman Zhong Kuei, whom the old sword-carrying ape killed without any hesitation, the future great chancellor of a certain Confucian academy, who was also qualified. It was a pity that master had calculated everything and had almost included the entire Tongye continent. However, a young outer court oddjob worker had unexpectedly popped out from the Fuyao sect and accidentally discovered the existence of that 12th realm senior. A slight change in one part of Master's body had affected the situation as a whole, so much so that it had completely disrupted Master's brilliant plan that he had been planning for a long time. Could it be that the fate of the Tongya continent was so strong? It couldn't even be compared to the Hassa continent that was closest to the inverted hanging mountain. One had to know that in the South Sura continent, there was Old Man Chen who carried the sun and moon on his shoulders. According to the Master, he was very famous in his hometown and was regarded as a top enemy. Even the Master said that as long as he was in the vast world, he would never be able to defeat the mellow scholar Chen Chunan. A young Taoist priest wearing a hibiscus crown came to the border town south of the Great Spring. He didn't walk into the Hua town. Instead, he walked slowly along the yellow city wall. He stretched out his hand and gently slid it across the rough wall with a smile on his face. Finally, he walked along the official road to an inn near the town. The business inside was cold and cheerless. The little cripple was napping on the table, the old hunchback was smoking on the other side of the curtain, and the woman was sitting behind the counter, calculating and calculating, making her want to smash the abacus. The young Taoist priest crossed the threshold of the inn. His eyes were gentle as he called out to Zhonyang softly. The little cripple looked up in a daze. He was a little annoyed. Why did a young Taoist priest who coveted the shopkeeper's beauty come in after the down-and-out scholar? Were there no good-looking women in the world? Why did he have to come to their inn to pester the shopkeeper? The woman looked up and asked in confusion, "Little Taoist priest, do we know each other?" The young Taoist priest looked ordinary. Other than the rare Taoist crown, he was not eye-catching in any other aspect. He looked ordinary, was neither tall nor short, and his Taoist robe looked old. The woman felt that this person's gaze was very strange. He didn't have the obscenity of the young men in the Hua town, nor did he have the confusing infatuation of Zhong Kuei. It was as if he was greeting an old acquaintance after a long time. He was clearly looking at her, but it also seemed like he was looking at a distant place. Zhonyang was a little unhappy. After she asked, the young Taoist priest just smiled and looked at her. His eyes were getting brighter and brighter, making her heart palpitate. The young Taoist priest burst into tears for no reason, but he asked with a smile, "Zhonyang, shall we go home?" Before Zhonyang could scold him, the young Taoist priest had already wiped his tears. He said self-deprecatingly, "I mistook you for someone else. Please forgive me." He sat down at a table and took out a few pieces of silver from his sleeve. He slapped them on the table and said with a smile, "Buy wine. Buy as many jugs as you can." The inn was located at the border, where crooks and honest folk were mixed together. There were often bad people coming and going. The lame young man had been doing odd jobs in the inn for many years and had seen many crazy customers. He didn't feel that he needed to think too much. He took out some silver and said, "Our green plum wine is divided into 3 grades. If it's the best green plum wine, you can only buy 1 jar." The young Taoist priest didn't wait for the cripple to finish and said with a smile, "I want 1 jug of the best green plum wine." Traveling away from home, the world was vast, and he couldn't open his heart to anyone. It was even more lonely than a sage, so how could he not drink? He had drunk almost all the good and bad wine in the Tongyi continent. He liked to drink, so it was just right to have a decent-looking blade-strengthening gourd as a wine jug. As for the 2 strange natal flying swords in the blade-strengthening gourd, it was better to keep them. When he returned home, he could give them to the younger generation as a gift to make up for missing their coming-of-age ceremony. In his hometown, giving swords was better than giving anything else. The accident in the Tongyi continent had revealed the secret of heaven early. It was not his fault that his 2 subordinates couldn't hide until the end. It was just the right time. Now, it was up to the Hassa continent and Fuyao continent to see if things would go smoothly. Originally, the Taiping Mountain and the Fuyao sect should have been destroyed. The Taiping Mountain Lord of Heaven, the sect master, and Ji Hai and his wife would all die. Female Crown Princess Huang Ting, who had taken up much of the fate of a continent, was no exception. As for Zhong Kuei of the Dafu Academy, he was actually ranked very high on the list of the young Taoist priest of the Taiping Mountain. The death of Zhong Kuei was as significant as flattening the entire Taiping Mountain. Therefore, the order he gave the sword-carrying white ape was to exchange its life for its life. If it could successfully escape into the broken dragon's vein, it would be worth it no matter how badly it was injured. After that, it would hide and hide. Otherwise, he couldn't protect the old ape. After all, he could only take one person from the vast world. If the old ape didn't hurt its foundation and was still a 12th state sword cultivator, he might have taken it instead of coming to this border in to drink alone because of some old friendship. Zhong Kuei should have lived longer and been more infatuated. The hunchbacked third master signaled Zhonyang to be careful of this person with his eyes. The woman insisted on carrying the wine jug and 2 white bowls and sat down opposite the young Taoist priest. Zhonyang poured 2 bowls of wine and asked with a smile, "Little Taoist priest, did you mistake me for someone else or do you really recognize me?" The young Taoist priest took a sip of the green plum wine and praised the good wine. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and said, "I was mistaken." Zhonyang asked with a smile, "Little Taoist priest, you are bold and generous. You have never referred to yourself as a Taoist priest. Are you a fake Taoist priest who pretended to be an immortal in Taiping Mountain?" The young Taoist priest shook his head and said, "A real Taoist priest can't be more real. I found a random appearance and practiced in Taiping Mountain for more than 100 years before I got a jade pendant. Later, when I went down the mountain to travel, I died without a body. My sect couldn't even take back the jade pendant. It was very tragic. After that, I changed my appearance and wandered around, looking for wine to drink. Finally, I returned to the Great Spring and visited many places, such as the Burial River. I also met a scholar named Wang Qi in the Mirage City. He was not young at that time, but his name was really good. Qi, the name of a sage, was slender, and had a sincere heart. It's a pity that a dignified gentleman's 1,000-mile dike was destroyed by an ant's nest. He was a coward. Zhonyang's wrist trembled slightly as she raised the bowl to drink. She suddenly finished all the wine and put down the bowl. She asked, "Why are you telling me this? Do you want to kill me?" The young Taoist priest seemed to have heard the funniest joke in the world. He muttered, "I already said that I recognized the wrong person. It has nothing to do with you. That old friend of mine has 9 lives. How can I kill him? If I kill you once, Lord Bai will feel it. You don't know how pitiful Lord Bai is. Even if the scholarly sage kills me, I'll only be half dead. He'll only help me return home earlier. As long as Lord Bai sees me with his own eyes, even if there's a world between us, he'll still be able to turn me into ashes." He was a little sad and sighed, "I can't bear to kill you either." This young Taoist priest who could drive 2 great demons to fight for their lives smiled and picked up the bowl. He took a sip of wine and said, "Looking back, the Tongya continent suffered a great calamity. In the future, it's actually a blessing in disguise." Zhonyang's heart was in turmoil. "Don't worry. I've already drunk the wine and complained. You won't remember anything." The young Taoist priest put down the bowl and stretched out his finger to draw a circle around the rim of the bowl. Then, he stood up and turned to leave the inn. The scene in the inn was strange. It was as if time had reversed. Zhonyang, third elder, and the little cripple began to talk and do things in reverse. Finally, when the young Taoist priest crossed the threshold of the inn, everything returned to normal. The little cripple was dozing off on the table, the hunchback was smoking a pipe by the door curtain, and Zhonyang was still calculating on the abacus. Everything was still. Only the young Taoist priest's wine bowl was left on the table. He leaned back and looked at the counter. Zhonyang coldly looked up at him and met the young Taoist priest's eyes. The young Taoist priest looked behind Zhonyang. The snow-white tails were as thick as pillars, densely clustered behind the woman. The young Taoist priest counted the fox tails and frowned. Soon, his brows relaxed and he left with a smile. Zhonyang coldly said, "You'll be found out sooner or later." He had already left the inn, but his voice was still echoing in the inn. "I couldn't ask for more. Otherwise, why would I do something unnecessary to deal with a young man who even Mount Taiping wants to protect?" A moment later, the little cripple continued to snore softly. The smoke continued to curl up, and the sound of the woman calculating on the abacus became chaotic. After a long time, The woman caught a glimpse of the white bowl on the table. She slapped the abacus and said angrily, "Little cripple, are you blind? Why didn't you take the wine bowl on the table?" The little cripple woke up with a start. When he saw the wine bowl on the table, he scratched his head. He clearly remembered to clean it up, but he didn't dare to talk back to the woman who was in a bad mood. He took the wine bowl and walked to the kitchen. At the vast border, a young man with a crooked Taoist crown was singing loudly. "Take the wine gourd, take 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 the wine, my beloved little lady's delicate hand, tender as white jade lotus root." Outside the ruined temple, the wind and rain were blowing. However, even with such a heavy downpour, one could still smell the scent of blood. Sui Yu swept to the side. Tonight, she didn't use a long sword like a swordmaster like she did at the inn. Instead, she held infatuation in her hand and her body was as strong as a wild mountain monkey. Time and time again, she twisted and turned in the forest. Often, with a swing of her sword, the sword aura would spit out and split the soldiers along with their armor into two halves. Liu Baixiang went in the opposite direction of Sui right and walked in large strides. As long as the border army soldiers drew close with their knives, they would casually swing their knives. Unlike Sui right's wide and open sword attacks, Liu Baixiang, regardless of whether it was the edge of his knife or the fierce Gang Qi that was as thin as hair, all of them only targeted the necks of the armored soldiers or used the tip of his knife to point at the foreheads of the elite border army soldiers. During this time, in the forest on both sides, there were martial arts masters and military cultivators hiding in the ordinary border army. They waited for an opportunity to sneak attack Liu Baixiang and Sui Yu. There were even bolts of strong crossbows that shot out. Sui Yu's sharpness was even stronger than the sword aura of infatuation in her hand. No wonder she was the first female swordmaster in the history of the Lotus Flower-blessed land to attempt to use her sword to open the sky and ascend with her body. Liu Baixiang strolled leisurely. These soldiers could only be considered the elites of the mortal world. Even if there were a few slightly more troublesome enemies mixed in, did they deserve to be surrounded and killed? Did they not know how many masters and masters of both the righteous and evil paths had gathered in Liu Baixiang's last battle? Furthermore, together with Zhu Lian, the three people who walked out of the picture scroll outside of Hua Town were different from the past. Sui Yu focused on practicing her sword and quickly adapted to the flow of qi in this vast world. How could Zhu Lian and Liu Baixiang slack off? There was a big difference between a sixth realm martial artist who needed to be distracted to adapt to the reverse flow of the qi of heaven and earth and a sixth realm peak martial artist who had stabilized his realm. In front of the ruined temple gate, Chen Pinggan only used flying swords Chu 1 and Chu 15 to attack Prince Liu Tsong once in cooperation with the martial madman Zhu Lian. After that, he did not attack again and still stood under the eaves with a withered branch. Xu Qingju, who was wearing the military school's golden crow warp armor, and the immortal master of Caomu nunnery, Xu Tong, as well as the army cultivators stood in front of Liu Tsong. At the cost of the lives of Xu Tong, a talisman, and an army cultivator, they blocked the attack. It could not be helped. Chen Pinggan had used all his means to deal with eunuch Li Xu Qingju and Xu Tong knew it very well. Therefore, they had already expected the two flying swords Chu 1 and Chu 15 to come and go like ghosts. Liu Tsong fought and retreated. Xu Qingju and Xu Tong were always protecting the first prince. The rest of the army cultivators, who had been in battle for a long time, tried their best to block the attack of the hunchbacked old man. They also had to pay attention to the short and strong man in snow-white armor who had not yet attacked. Liu Tsong did not expect such a lineup to be able to kill Chen Pinggan and the 4 Grandmaster attendants. However, as long as 2 or 3 of them were killed or seriously injured, it would be enough to set the stage for victory. At this moment, Zhu Lian was worthy of the nickname Martial Madman. His whole body was like a spring and as fast as thunder. As soon as there was a movement, the army cultivators had a trump card for a sneak attack. Their hair was like a halberd, and they could predict the future and accurately dodge. When Zhu Lian charged, the hunchbacked old man was used to bending down even more. His hands were hanging on the ground. Every time he stepped on the ground, he would shoot to some unknown direction like an arrow. His figure was really too fast. Once, Zhu Lian seized an opportunity and appeared like a ghost in front of a middle-aged cultivator. He punched through the man's abdomen and then used the dead man's corpse as a shield to block the saber of one of Shu Tong's silver-armored warriors. After throwing away the corpse, he instantly moved to the side. After several steps forward, he did not even look and smashed his arm into the head of the cultivator. With a bang, the cultivator became a headless corpse and fell heavily several zhong away. Wei Xian, who was wearing one of the 8 sets of ancestors' due armor, used his hands to grab the spirit weapons of the cultivators who brushed past Zhu Lian. As long as he caught a spirit weapon in his hand, it would either be crushed or bent by his hands. In addition, armored border soldiers with sabers constantly poured out from both sides of the road. Wei Xian began to retreat. Zhu Lian often slapped and kicked the spirit weapons of the cultivators toward Wei Xian. Wei Xian not only had to kill the armored warriors who were charging toward the ruined temple, but he also had to clean up the trash thrown by Zhu Lian. Far away on the mountain road, Liu Tsong, who was trying his best to look at the battlefield, asked with a calm expression, "Do we really have to exhaust my 5,000 men? Do we have to rely on 5,000 lives to kill these guys?" Shu Qingju said in a deep voice, "That's the only way. Shu Tong and I, as well as the 3 people your highness has arranged in advance, will wait for the opportunity to deal a fatal blow to these 4 people when they take a breath. We'll try our best not to let these people die in vain." Liu Tsong tightened his grip on the saber at his waist, blue veins popping out. Why is the strength of these 4 martial arts grandmasters so different from what was recorded in the spy report? Immortal Master Shu Tong said bitterly, "In fact, General Shu and I are even more puzzled than your highness. Back at the inn, we were evenly matched with our opponents. If we fight in pairs tonight, General Shu and I will definitely die." Liu Tsong exhaled a turbid breath. "It's not your fault. It's Chen Pinggan who hides his strength too well. It doesn't matter. No matter how heavy our casualties are, we can make up for it with this guy." Under the eaves of the ruined temple, Chen Pinggan looked down and saw the jade token of the ancestral master hall given to him by the young Daoist priest of Taiping Mountain. Chen Pinggan fell into deep thought. 6. 355. On the hill where the ruined temple was located, the rain was getting heavier and heavier. It beat on the armors of the northern border army of Daquan, making crackling sounds. Most of the armors of the border army were worn and covered with scratches from swords, spears, and arrows. The new rain beat on the old armor. In order to allow Shu Qingju and Shu Tong to go all out and seize the fleeting opportunity to kill Chen Pinggan and his entourage, the first Prince Liu Tsong had silently retreated halfway up the hill. Beside him were dozens of trusted subordinates who were heavily guarded. These men of sacrifice wore armor that was heavier than the ones of the border army besieging the ruined temple. They were the standard armor of heavy soldiers. There were also 3 outstanding cultivators accompanying the army. One of them was a sword cultivator of the sea-viewing state who had nurtured a fierce natal flying sword. The other was a talisman master who was good at setting up arrays. The last one was a Taoist priest and a military cultivator who wore sweet dew armor. Liu Tsong was determined to obtain Chen Pinggan's head. However, he was afraid of the unexpected. He did not want to stumble on a nameless hill. Since Wang Qi, the gentleman from the academy, who was hiding somewhere, was willing to participate in this conspiracy, Liu Tsong did not trust this highly respected leader of the Great Spring Scholarly Circle. Liu Tsong would not have dared to take such a big risk if it were not for Jiao Shuzhen's attractive offer and the involvement of the general seed of the Shu family and the Caomu nunnery. He was really curious about the so-called treasure of the Bio mansion. How valuable was it that an academy gentleman would not hesitate to go against his conscience and plan this siege for the abbot? Although Wang Qi had his own reasons, he could explain to the Hill Master of the Dafu Academy that he wanted to catch a fake disciple of the Hall of Ancestral Masters of Taiping Mountain, and he could also slander Chen Pinggan. For example, he suspected that this outsider was a demon who had escaped from the well prison and changed his identity and appearance. Therefore, he had to ask 5,000 soldiers of the northern border to besiege the mountain. But Liu Zong didn't think it was a flawless explanation. However, this did not have much to do with him. Wang Qi was still a true gentleman of the Dafu Academy. Once a gentleman spoke, even the emperors and monarchs of the dynasties had to listen to him, much less a prince like Liu Zong bringing troops up the mountain was completely in line with the rules set by the Confucian Academy. After killing Chen Pinggan, how Wang Qi would answer to the academy was not something that Liu Zong could interfere with. But when Wang Qi secretly left Mirage City and came to the border to find Liu Zong, he had already handed over some of Imperial Horse Directorate head eunuch Li Li's hidden chess pieces to Liu Zong. To tell the truth, when Liu Zong received the files on the various residences of the capital, the local Jianghu, and the sects on the mountains, he had been stunned. Eunuch Li Li was known as the guardian scholar of the Great Spring, so when had his faction become so intertwined that it had infiltrated the entire territory of the Great Spring? Why would Wang Qi, as a senior gentleman who enjoyed a good reputation in the central region of Tongyi continent, connect with a court eunuch? No matter how good Li Li's reputation was in court, he was just an old bastard without a penis. Compared to the gentleman Wang Qi, he was like the mud on the clouds. But Li Li's death was good. This old eunuch had long ago begun to view the third prince in a new light. The poor third prince had worked hard for 10-some years, venturing deep into the heart of the northern Jin to destroy the Pine Needle Lake Divine Temple and Mount Jinhuang Divine Residence, but he had actually been killed in the territory of the Yarrow clan. Even the invincible Li Li had failed miserably. One careless move and he had lost the entire game. Man proposes, God disposes. Truly, the mandate of heaven is with me, Liu Zong. But Liu Zong had fought on the border for many years and commanded more than 100,000 elite border soldiers. He had fearlessly charged into enemy lines many times on the battlefield, but today, he found that he couldn't help but feel nervous. In front of the ruined temple, Wei Xian acted just like he had at the inn, guarding the gate by himself. If any of the Great Spring soldiers came forward to seek death, Wei Xian would naturally not be polite. Wearing the sweet dew armor, he didn't fear ordinary swords and bows at all. He just let them hack and hit the armor. Then, with just a punch, the soldiers who dared to approach him were all sent flying far away. Some of the corpses near the temple gate were also sent flying by Wei Xian's feet. The nature of an emperor was that he would not allow others to snore beside his bed. Now, Wei Xian would not allow corpses to be an eyesore wherever he stood. Only occasionally would Wei Xian dodge a few specially made arrows that contained a mysterious mechanism. Without exception, they were all shot by the godly archers from the border of the forest, who had drawn their bows to their fullest. Compared to the massacre at the martial madman's side, Wei Xian's attacks could be described as gentle and soft. Dodging and getting close were intertwined. As long as Zhu Lian got close to them or closed the distance of an arm, the nearby soldiers would meet a tragic end. Their armor would be shattered and embedded into their bodies. Their flesh and blood would be badly mangled. Not only would they die on the spot, but they would also die tragically. On the battlefield on the right side of the Sui dynasty, sword light bloomed again and again in the forest. With a sweep of the sword, several soldiers would be cut in half along with the trees. At the end of the battle, there was not a single tall tree in the forest for hundreds of steps around the right side of the Sui dynasty. On Liu Baixiang's side, the frozen snow, a magic weapon passed down from the ancestors of the Huan family of the Eagle Castle, moved and paused every now and then. Sometimes, he would step on the tree trunk like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. Liu Baixiang's figure flashed and disappeared in a flash. Only the blade of the frozen snow, which was flowing with Gang Qi, left a snow-white ray of light in the pitch-black curtain of rain that lasted for a long time. In just the time it took to burn a stick of incense, the elites of the Daquan border army had already left 600 corpses behind. This was because the forest was not suitable for soldiers to swarm in. Chen Pinggan, who had been standing at the temple gate, lowered his head and smiled. A little lotus figure jumped out from the ground and waved its remaining lotus root arm at Chen Pinggan while babbling. Then, it pointed in a direction for Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan followed the direction of the little fellow's finger. It was the highest point of a mountain. The little lotus figure meant that there were two guys standing there and watching the battle. They were so powerful that even it didn't dare to get too close to that mountain. Chen Pinggan asked softly, "Then, did you see a young man wearing a Taoist robe and a hibiscus crown on his head?" The little lotus figure shook its head and waved its hand vigorously. Chen Pinggan gave it a thumbs up and chuckled softly, "Go hide in the temple." The little lotus figure nodded vigorously and jumped high over the threshold. When it saw Pei Qian, who was burping, it was a little reluctant. The first time it saw her, it didn't like her very much. Later, it probably didn't hate her so much. Sometimes, it would appear beside Chen Pinggan. One time, when it just emerged from the soil, it was hit by Pei Qian's mountain walking stick. It dodged quickly and stuck its head out somewhere else. Pei Qian ran around with the mountain walking stick in her hand. As a result, she was exhausted by the little fellow's teasing and couldn't hit it even once. In the end, Chen Pinggan pulled her ear and walked for a mile. It was so painful that she cried loudly. Seeing that Pei Qian was sneaking around and seemed to want to take the mountain walking stick, the little lotus figure was a little angry. This time, it was not afraid of her at all. It walked to Pei Qian's feet and lay down on the ground. Pei Qian held the mountain walking stick and hesitated for a long time. She glanced at the back of Chen Pinggan at the entrance of the temple and finally threw away the mountain walking stick. She squatted down and smiled. "You are a waste of money. You are useless. In the future, my father will definitely sell you for money. At that time, I can buy a lot of candid whores. TSK TSK TSK, so delicious." The little lotus figure sulked and simply lay on its side, not looking at the little tanned girl. Pei Qian stretched out a finger and poked the little thing's armpit. "Little waste of money. In the future, if you become my little follower, I won't let my father sell you for money. How about it?" The little lotus figure rolled and crawled to sit cross-legged in the distance, looking very much like Chen Pinggan when he was studying. Pei Qian rolled her eyes and said earnestly, "Do you know how rich I am now? I have a box that is said to be a treasure chest. There are a lot of treasures in it. In the future, you have to be more respectful to me, do you understand? If you are obedient and become my follower, maybe one day I will be merciful and take out a beautiful copper coin from it. I will learn from old Wei and wave my hand and reward you." The little lotus figure's expression did not change. Pei Qian said angrily, "You little waste of money, why are you so insensible? Do you believe that when I learn the peerless sword art tonight, I will poke your head full of bumps every time you show your head? Don't you know that I can see where you are hiding under the ground?" The little lotus figure was a little scared and pitifully turned her head to look at Chen Pinggan. Pei Qian immediately smiled and said, "I am just teasing you. Why can't you take a joke?" At the entrance of the temple, Chen Pinggan slightly calmed down. Since he knew that there were two people on the mountain watching the fire from the shore, at least he knew in his heart that he would not be caught off guard. He guessed that one of them was most likely the gentleman from the academy who was guarding the Mirage City. He had already seen the gentleman, Zhong Kuei. He had also heard of the academy's words in the sword village of Shushui Nation. This time, he must have just met a hypocrite. There was no need to make a fuss. The amount of knowledge was not necessarily related to the amount of morality. Moreover, the disciples of the academy were also cultivating. On the path of cultivation, the higher one went to become an immortal, the stronger the wind and rain on the mountain. Naturally, there were more temptations and dangers. It was not easy to always stay true to one's heart. When he was in the Bio prefecture, he saw the big demon at the bottom of the river who was fighting with the water goddess. He felt strange that the imperial court of the Great Spring Dynasty did not care about this demon. Perhaps what the gentleman wanted was no longer the principles of the sages. He was no longer wholeheartedly teaching the people to be good. Instead, he was pursuing his own immortality or other external things, such as the immortal spell on the bamboo scroll that could refine all things. Wealth moved people's hearts. The desire for immortality moved an old gentleman of the academy and led him astray. What was so strange about that? Didn't the eldest disciple of the saint, who was a 12th realm immortal at his peak, also take the path of deceiving his master and destroying his ancestors? However, Chen Pingan's greatest taboo was the young Daoist priest of Taiping Mountain who had put him in danger. It was that person who had visited the post house of Riding Crane City and personally handed the jade token of the direct disciple of the ancestral hall to Chen Pingan. Chen Pingan only realized that something was wrong when Liu Tsong thought that he would definitely win and revealed a trace of the heavenly secret. The reason why Chen Pingan, who was cautious and meticulous, had fallen so badly this time was that before this, his impression of Taiping Mountain was too good. Carrying the long qi sword of the eldest sword immortal Chen Qingdu, he had mistakenly entered the blessed land of the lotus flowers. Tong Qingqing and Fan Wn of the Mirror Heart sect had used the mirror to combine their souls and bodies. Chen Pingan had a good impression of her. After that, the ancestral master of Taiping Mountain, the Old Lord of Heaven, did not hesitate to destroy the two immortal swords of the mountain protecting array in order to kill the sword-carrying white ape. In order to save Zhong Kuei's remnant soul, he did not hesitate to drop his realm. His impression of her was even better. The first person who knew about Taiping Mountain was when he and Lu Tai entered the Eagle Fortress and destroyed the century-old plan of the evil Golden Core Cultivator. The evil Golden Core Cultivator, who had almost killed Chen Pingan with a mountain, tried to raise a nascent soul in the heart acupoint of the wife of the fort master of the Eagle Fortress. Before that, the young Daoist priest of Taiping Mountain, who had chased after the old Golden Core Cultivator, should have been Huang Ting, who had yet to go to the blessed land as a banished immortal. Earlier, according to Lu Tai, he was a nascent soul cultivator of Taiping Mountain who had no hope of immortality. His body and soul were decaying and he knew that he was about to die, so he began to wander around, trying to do as much good as possible for the people below the mountain. For some reason, he had a conflict with an earth-level deity of the Fuquang sect who was full of hostility. The two sides fought fiercely. The latter had never thought that his opponent's vitality was so weak and he was actually a nascent soul cultivator. He was chased to the mountain where the Eagle Fortress used to be. At the risk of dying together, he used the Fuquang sect's art of inviting gods to the realm, but he didn't invite the next god. Instead, he used his own life essence as the price to perform a forbidden art and summoned the clone of an ancient fiend cultivator. They fought to the end and died together. The ground under their feet was full of yin qi, which was no different from the ruins of a battlefield where hundreds of thousands of soldiers were buried. That was why the evil Golden Core Cultivator had set up the insidious trap. Everything about the Daoist priest of Taiping Mountain, whether he had heard about it or seen it with his own eyes, fascinated Chen Pingan. Even the narrow saber in Lu Baixiang's hand, the snow-stopping saber, was a relic of the earth-level deity of the nascent soul cultivator who had died in the battle. Therefore, after receiving the jade tablet from the Hall of Founding Masters, Chen Pingan didn't think too much about it. He only thought that the founding master of Taiping Mountain wanted to protect Chen Pingan after he left the post house, or that Zhong Kuei had interceded for him. That was why he had hurriedly sent a flying sword to a nearby Daoist priest to give Chen Pingan a protective jade tablet. Now, it seemed that Chen Pingan had taken it for granted. Chen Pingan took the jade tablet that Liu Tsong had called genuine. The material was excellent, and it was difficult to refine it into nothingness or destroy it directly in a short time. He turned around and tossed it to Pei Qian. Put this jade tablet into the oil paper umbrella. Remember to close the umbrella and don't open it again. Pei Qian caught the beautiful jade tablet that she had been eyeing for a long time and obediently did as she was told. Her hands and feet were nimble, without the slightest sloppiness. She wasn't muddle-headed when it came to important matters. Pei Qian didn't dare. She was afraid that Chen Pingan would be angry at her. That was the only time Chen Pingan would be angry. If Zhong Kuei hadn't interceded for her, she would most likely still be in that shabby inn in Hua Town, sweeping the floor and fetching water every day, working like a cow for that old woman with a swaying bosom. The old Confucian monk on the mountaintop sneered. Chen Pingan discovered our whereabouts. The tall and sturdy man didn't care at all. This guy wasn't simple to begin with. Wasn't it all thanks to him that Bayou Manor made such a big commotion? Otherwise, why would my master deal with a pure martial artist like him who hasn't matured yet? Before my master left, he told me with a smile that the sword-nurturing gourd on Chen Pingan's waist was just a small bonus. What my master really cared about was who he was, that he was willing to give him a treasure that could conceal the secrets of heaven. If it wasn't too troublesome, my master would certainly be willing to lend it to him. However, my master was afraid that once he made a move, the entire Tongye continent would follow suit. Therefore, he wanted us to explore the path and deduce the identity of the person behind the scenes. If it was really the work of some Confucian sage, or even the divine hand that was specially used to deal with the chaos in the Tongye continent. The man quickly stopped talking and didn't dare to say another word. The gentleman from the academy, Wang Qi, asked, "What would happen?" The man laughed and said, "I forgot." Although Wang Qi didn't ask further, his mood gradually improved. This tall and sturdy man thought that he was just a small demon, an ant that had yet to reach the Jindan stage. However, once he entered the water, his combat power would be comparable to the weaker Jindan stage cultivators on the mountaintop. Tonight's torrential rain was a timely rain. Before he met his master, he thought that he was an overlord who occupied the lake and led a group of stinky shrimp soldiers and crab generals. He was very awe-inspiring as a local emperor. Later, his master gave him a few pointers and he had the good fortune later on. In ancient times, the buried river was once a remnant section of the Great Blasphemy Sea. As the flood dragon's route, his realm skyrocketed. If it wasn't for that bitch who buried the river blocked him at the section above the Bio prefecture and the water deity temple because of some lowly mortals who refused to let him pass, he would have already reached the Jindan stage. If he entered the sea again, he would have reached the Yuanying stage. Originally, if that bitch was willing to let him smoothly complete the buried river, it would be a great good karma between them. In the future, when he attained the great Tao, no matter how cold and ruthless he was, he had to find an opportunity to repay her kindness. Otherwise, in the cycle of the heavenly way, there would be all kinds of obstacles in his future cultivation path. He couldn't figure out why that bitch was so determined to block his great Tao. Was it really because he had harmed the lives of those mortals? Wasn't it too ridiculous? He firmly believed that there must be an unknown inside story. Perhaps the men and women who became his food happened to have a great relationship with the water deity temple. That was why she was so angry and did business at a loss again and again. She wouldn't rest until he was dead. After so many years of life and death battles, he knew that the buried river goddess's cultivation base was not high. It was just that she had refined too many weapons and their quality was too good. She relied on the endless stream of weapons to firmly suppress him. Later on, he inexplicably received two great opportunities. First, his damaged Jindan was not only repaired, but the quality of his Jindan was also improved by a lot. Later on, the Bio prefecture became prosperous overnight and became an immortal's cave full of spiritual aura. What Wang Qi wanted was the refining formula that pointed straight to the great Tao. In the early years, the master personally told them, a gentleman and a water demon, that it was the great Tao of an ancient immortal. Moreover, it was vast and was also suitable for Confucian cultivation. In this way, it meant that once Wang Qi, who was about to die, got the immortal formula and succeeded in cultivation, not only could he live longer, he might even have the hope to compete for the title of Deputy Hill Master of the Academy. For so many years, Wang Qi could be said to have used both soft and hard methods on the Bio prefecture. His water demons buried the river and even flooded the Bio prefecture. He also damaged the Jindan of the water deity temple. Wang Qi hoped that the water deity would know what was good for her and ask for help from the imperial court of the Great Spring. Wang Qi even left the capital to travel to the buried river deity temple and deliberately revealed some of the gentleman's skills. However, the water deity turned a blind eye to it. She didn't even complain to him, a gentleman. After that, Wang Qi showed great kindness and tried his best to ask the emperor of the Great Spring Liu family to raise the Bio prefecture. He hoped that the water deity would remember his kindness and take the initiative to hand over the immortal formula on the praying for rain stele that only she understood the gist of trueness. The buried river deity was still indifferent. She even threatened to have the sage books of the literary sage to worship the temple and share the incense. Otherwise, she would rather guard the broken plaque of the Bio prefecture. This water goddess is really stubborn, but her brain must have been flooded with water. The Broken Temple Mountain was not peaceful. Taiping Mountain was not peaceful either. On the bank of the most famous river in the central divine continent, it was also not peaceful today. A man and a woman who were traveling here came. The woman was wearing a brocade palace dress. Although the curtain hat covered her face, one could tell that she was a disaster just by looking at her figure and style. The man was slender with a thin face. He was wearing a snow-white marten coat and a red wine gourd hung on his waist. If Chen Pinggan and the little girl in green were here, they would realize that they were the master and servant who met them on the cliff plank road on a snowy night at the border of Huangting country and Dali. The woman in the palace dress was called Qing Ying. After parting with Chen Pinggan and the other two, the woman showed her true form of a white fox in the canyon. Her body was as big as a mountain. The man who was the size of a grain of rice in front of her just called out her name casually. The woman who already had 8 foxtails was cut off. She called the man Master Bai. The man looked up at this time. There was a white emperor city in the colorful clouds. The Devil Dao hero, the city lord of White Emperor City, was regarded as the world's #1 chess player. He raised a flagpole with the words "First Chess Player of the World" written on it. So far, no one could make the city lord lower his flag. How domineering. The man smiled and said, "It's a pity that the glazed building is gone." The woman in the palace dress said softly, "Master, I heard that the guy who likes to wear pink Taoist robes admires you a lot." The man turned a deaf ear. He retracted his gaze and said with a smile, "City Lord, you don't have to leave the city. I'm just passing by." The woman in the palace dress was excited. She felt proud. There was only one person who could make White Emperor City leave White Emperor City in 1,000 years. It was only the disciple of the sage of literature. Our master Bai rejected him so easily. The man walked slowly on the bank of the Yellow River. He sighed softly and said to her, "Leave for a while." The woman in the palace dress was nervous. She didn't dare to ask and immediately left. The man stood still. An old man in a Confucian robe appeared beside the man with a solemn face. He bowed and said respectfully, "LV Shi of the Record of Rights Academy greets Master Bai." The man was expressionless. LV Shi. He was the Grand Chancellor of the Record of Rights Academy, one of the 3 great academies of Confucianism. He was a Confucian sage who was destined to be worshipped by the sage of literature and had his statue erected in the Confucian temple. However, such a Confucian sage who was close to immortality treated the man who had traveled all the way from the Aquarius continent to the central divine continent with such respect. LV She didn't know what to say for a moment. It was too difficult. The matter he had to discuss was too important. The slender man who liked to call him Master Bai after recognizing his identity muttered to himself, "Back then, I told the little teacher the true names of all the great demons in the world and helped him build the 9 great cauldrons on the top of the 9 mountains in the world. I hoped that both sides could coexist peacefully. After that, all the demons in the world went into hibernation. They retreated to the mountains and forests and hid from the world. That was why you humans started to climb the mountains and cultivate. That was why there were immortals on the mountains. That was why there was such a beautiful scenery in this world. Back then, the little teacher who had just obtained human merit swore to me that if Mr. treated the common people with respect, the Confucian school would treat Mr. with respect on behalf of the world." At this point, the man turned to look at the Grand Chancellor of the Academy and twitched the corner of his mouth. The title of Mr. has almost been monopolized by the Confucian school. Ha ha. LV She wanted to say something but stopped. His expression was solemn. The man continued to look at the rolling river water that flowed to the sea and never returned. He said, "Later on, there was a mountain search map. Later on, there was a town called Bai Zi among the 9 majestic town towers in the vast world. Now, you are walking in front of me and want me to go to Po Suo, Tongyi, and Fu Yarrow continents to help you search the mountains for great demons. Why? Because the Sage of Rights called me Mr. twice back then? Or because of the tall building you helped me build? So that I can have a place in the vast world?" The man turned his head again and said with a slightly heavier tone, LV She could not say a word. Fortunately, that Lord Bai revealed a smile and sighed, "But I do believe him, and I know his difficulties. That is why I still follow the rules you set up all these years. As for you, you are too unreasonable. Scholars should not be so domineering. You should use the principles of the sages to educate the common people. You should use the spring wind and rain to nourish things silently. Lv Shi, who felt like he was being suppressed by the 5 great mountains of the central earth, relaxed slightly. The man said self-mockingly, "It is a great misfortune for the demon race to have me, by Ze. Lv Shi's scalp began to tingle again. The man didn't want to argue with this junior and slowly said, "I broke the rules this time and left that building without permission. I went out to travel the world because I wanted to see with my own eyes if the world that the little teacher described to me back then has come true after so many years. May I ask, mister, what is the result? Is it good or bad?" Lv Shi asked with a trembling voice. One must know that Master Bai's perception was related to the trend of a world, no, 2 world. The man smiled and said, "I want to see again." He finally said, "Can I?" Although he seemed to be asking, he did not even look at the Grand Chancellor of the Academy. But just the aura contained in Master Bai's words was enough to make Lv Shi's abbot unable to conceal his aura. The water of the Yellow River surged up and down, waves crashing against the shore. The colorful clouds above gathered and dispersed, revealing the majestic true appearance of White Emperor City. Lv Shi finally said in a low voice, "Yes." Wei Xian still firmly guarded the empty space in front of the dilapidated temple and stood tall. Zhu Lian was even more ferocious and shocking. The more injured he was, the greater his killing power. He was like a mad demon. He was invincible. However, Sui Yuyu, who had a strong sword momentum, was ambushed by Xu Qingju and Xu Tong from the Caomu nunnery when he was about to take a breath after breaking 900 armors and killing 200 more border soldiers than Lu Baixiang. Even so, Sui Yuyu still used the last bit of his aura to kill more than 120 border soldiers in armor under the eyes of the 2. Only then did Xu Qingju cut off his head, and Xu Tong, the immortal master who did not dare to let his guard down, used his trump card to smash his body and soul. Other than the infatuation sword that fell to the ground, there should be no more sword beauty Sui Yuyu in the world. But just as Xu Ju bent down and was about to pick up the spoils of war, at the entrance of the dilapidated temple, a beautiful woman with a cold expression strode out. It was Sui Yuyu. When she brushed past Chen Pinggan, she said coldly, "He has broken through 1,100 armors." Chen Pinggan said helplessly, "1 gold copper coin is enough for me to buy another Zhenju mountain in my hometown." Sui Yuyu snorted coldly. She was in a bad mood and swept away like a startled swan. She reached out her hand and grabbed the infatuation sword in the distance. She held it firmly in her hand and a majestic sword aura shot out. Xu Qingju and Xu Tong were so scared that they moved 100 feet away. It turned out that before the battle, the secret that Wei Xian mentioned was that if Chen Pinggan died, all 4 of them would die. If Chen Pinggan did not die, after the 4 of them died, 1 gold copper coin would be able to walk out of the scroll again without any drop in the realm. The 2 enemies at the top of the mountain who were still watching by the side did not show up. Chen Pinggan had nothing to do and shook the withered branch in his hand. He felt sorry for the gold copper coin but also wanted to laugh. He said softly, "Senior's Taoist skills are really amazing." 1. 356. The heavy rain was like the beating of drums on the battlefield. The battle on the mountain was fierce. Especially when the woman riding the sword suddenly reappeared after her death and walked out of the ruined temple unscathed. Wang Qi, the gentleman on the top of the mountain, and the demon buried in the river looked at each other. What kind of immortal supernatural power was this? Could it be that the beautiful woman with outstanding swordsmanship was a talisman puppet of the unorthodox Taoist sect? Or was it the unknown Mohist art of mechanism? But when did the talisman and art of mechanism become so brilliant? In the open space of the mountain forest that was flattened by the sword Qi time and time again, the military general Xu Qingju glanced at the immortal master of Caomu nunnery, Xu Tong. If Xu Tong had not reminded him to be careful, he would have reached out to grab the infatuated sword that was bound to be a magic weapon. However, Shu Tong asked him to quickly move away. Shu Qingju was shocked and decisively abandoned the magic weapon that was at his fingertips. Only then did he escape from the sword master's sword-controlling technique of the resurrected woman. Otherwise, at least one of his arms would have been lost here. Shu Tong's heart was heavy. This woman is definitely not an ordinary pure martial artist. Shu Qingju fixed his eyes and saw that the long sword on the ground had been driven away. Then, the sword chi came down in an instant and the woman whose head was separated from her body disappeared into thin air. On a tree in the distance, Sui Yu stood on the branch unscathed, holding the infatuated sword in her hand. Sui Yu looked at Shu Qingju, who was wearing the military school's golden crow armor, and the immortal master Shu Tong, who was holding a talisman made of golden material in her hand. She was full of fighting spirit. She had a feeling that as long as there was another life-and-death battle that exhausted her pure genuine qi, she would be able to break through the realm soon. Shu Qingzhou's mind was shaken for a moment. This woman, after dying once, had her cultivation and momentum increased so obviously. It was obvious that she had seized the opportunity to break through the realm in the battle and had made up her mind to use him and Shu Tong as whetstones to sharpen her martial arts. Once she reached the seventh realm of Golden Body, his famous saber Daqiao would lose its meaning. Shu Qingju was a strong-willed and battle-hardened warrior. Even so, Shu Tong, as a qi trainer and a member of the Tsaomu Nunnery, the #1 immortal sect in the Great Spring Dynasty, had a smooth journey of cultivation. Shu Tong was not afraid of a simple warrior at the peak of the sixth realm at all. However, in the face of an enemy who was very likely to break through the realm on the battlefield and seemed to be an unkillable existence, she could cut off his head with one sword strike. How could Shu Tong not be frightened? There were all kinds of strange things in the boundless world. There were thousands of magic weapons and spiritual weapons, but a qi cultivator only had one life. Shu Qingju had already sensed Shu Tong's cowardice, but he did not fly into a rage out of humiliation. He did not lash out at the immortal who had enjoyed 100 years of bliss in the Mirage City, nor did he panic. Instead, he said calmly, "Let's kill her again. If she comes back to life, the two of us will avoid her." Shu Tong gritted her teeth and the golden talisman in her hand was shining. "Then let's kill her again at all cost." Sui Yu twitched the corner of her mouth. She looked at Shu Qingju and Shu Tong. They were just two skeletons under her feet on the way to heaven. On the other side of the battlefield, Lu Baixiang also needed to take a breath. However, because Sui Yu helped to attract Shu Qingju and Shu Tong's attention, the Wu Dao guru and qi cultivator secretly waited for this moment to launch a sneak attack. The lethality of the attack was far less than that of Shu Yu and Shu Tong. Therefore, he only had a wound on his ribs. He covered the wound with one hand and his shoulder was pierced by a dark green arrow that was specially made by the imperial court and covered with talisman patterns. Lu Baixiang shook the blood on the tip of his saber casually. He did not even look at the arrow, let alone free his hand to pull it out. Including him, the four most powerful people in the Lotus Flower-blessed land each received a sentence before they walked out of the painting. However, they did not know about it. As the leader of the four, Chen Pinggan was even kept in the dark. Wei Xian was the first to walk out of the painting. However, the sentence at the entrance of the ruined temple was said quite late. At that time, Lu Baixiang believed that Wei Xian would not lie about this kind of thing. He also believed that it was not Chen Pinggan who secretly instructed Wei Xian to lure the four to fight to the death. However, Lu Baixiang did not want to die for the time being. Zhu Lian was not dead. The hunchbacked old man in front of the ruined temple was the most vigorous. Indeed, the more seriously injured he was, the stronger his killing power was. Although Lu Baixiang had never heard of the gold and copper coins and only knew that there were 3 kinds of divine coins in this world, snowflake, minor heat, and guyu. However, Lu Baixiang felt that his life was comparable to that of a gold and copper coin. Anyway, he was about to break 1,000 armor. Since the agreement was imminent, there was no need to rush. Moreover, it was still too early to catch a big fish like him in this siege. Regarding the matter of breaking through the realm, Lu Baixiang's view was probably the most indifferent among the four. Sui Yu was undoubtedly the most enthusiastic one because she was the most ambitious one. She wanted to fulfill the long-cherished wish of the lotus flower-blessed land, which was to ascend with a sword. The second mouthful of fresh and pure genuine qi flowed in Lu Baixiang's body like a river. Although it was not as good as the previous peak state, it was enough to deal with the killing for another 30 minutes. The ruined temple was at the foot of the mountain. The border army of Daquan went up the mountain to kill the rumored giants of the Devil Path. Jiao Shuzhen's face was pale because of the heavy rain. Finally, he could not persuade an old butler of the Duke's mansion to help him hold a big umbrella over his head. Jiao Shuzhen had just experienced great joy and shock. First, a spy on the mountain sent a message to the foot of the mountain. The woman with a sword was killed by General Shu and Immortal Shu. Her head was cut off by Shu Qingju and her soul was scattered by the master of the Tsaomu nunnery. She could not be more dead. However, a moment later, another scout came down the mountain to report that the swordswoman had come back to life and started another battle with Shu Qingju and Shu Tong. This time, the swordswoman chased after the two of them and no longer targeted the border army soldiers. The desperate Duke of Daquan suddenly turned his head and looked at the soldiers who were silently climbing the mountain in the heavy rain not far away. He could vaguely see that some of them were young, about the same age as his son, Jiao Shuyi. Some of them were experienced soldiers who were no longer young, like Jiao Shuzhen. About half an hour later, Jiao Shuzhen, who was in a heavy mood, received another bad news. The swordswoman withstood a slash from Shu Qingzhou's saber and a punch from a golden-armored talisman puppet and pierced Shu Tong's heart with her sword. Immortal Master Shu, who should not have died on the spot, had used all his means. No matter how many elixirs he swallowed and how many immortal spells he cast to prolong his life, he still died. His entire heart had withered into ashes. After the woman with a sword died, her body disappeared again. When she walked out of the ruined temple for the second time, she had reached the Golden Body Realm, the seventh realm of martial arts. General Shu had already retreated and left the mountain without permission. The first prince was furious and threatened to severely punish the Shu family in Mirage City. Jiao Shuzhen did not say a word. Only the bone-chilling downpour in the winter night was like God's never-ending dream. The old butler, who had served the Duke's mansion for generations, comforted him softly. "Duke, as long as Mr. Wang doesn't do it himself, it means that it's not the time to make a final decision. Don't be too pessimistic." Jiao Shuzhen was expressionless. On the mountain, although Lu Baixiang was severely injured, except for the wound on his waist and the imperial arrow that pierced through his shoulder, his combat power was not affected much. He was still able to resist waves of attacks. Wei Xian, who was alone outside the ruined temple, could easily deal with some fish that escaped the net. The West Mountain Dew armor was indeed the armor of the military school that Shu Qingju was extremely jealous of. It should be noted that the armor that Shu Qingju wore was the second-class armor of the military school, the Golden Crow armor, which was much better than the Dew armor. In addition, Wei Xian was born in the army. The founding emperor of the Nanyuan Kingdom, who rose from the bottom of the market, spent most of his life in the military and won the reputation of being the enemy of 10,000 people in the history of the Lotus Flower-blessed land. After that, the so-called unparalleled fierce general on the battlefield, no matter how famous he was when he was alive, was at most the second Wei Xian. Therefore, Wei Xian was more suitable for fighting in the chaotic army than Lu Baixiang. Imperceptibly, in the battlefield where the army was in formation, Wei Xian had an advantage similar to that of the Confucian sage in the academy. This was not a talent that a martial artist at the peak of the sixth realm could have. Perhaps even the gurus at the eighth realm and the ninth realm could not have this talent. Zhu Lian did not hold back his strength, so he was seriously injured. When Wei Xian was about to switch positions with Zhu Lian rejected Wei Xian's good intentions. Once a martial madman was in a desperate situation, his ferocity was terrifying. Wei Xian still insisted on replacing Zhu Lian. He wanted to put on a good show of taking the head of the general in the midst of 10,000 soldiers. This was his forte. Although he would most likely have to pay with his life to kill the Prince of the Great Spring, Liu Tsong, Sui Yuyu had died twice. Wei Xian felt that it was not a loss if he could exchange his life for a completely unrestrained charge. Moreover, the guards at the border inn were guarding the door, and so was the door of the temple on the mountain. Did he not become a guard dog guarding the house? However, Zhu Lian's punch repelled a Qi cultivator's spiritual weapon and he took advantage of the momentum to retreat. His old body slid all the way back. His fists were already showing the white bones. Before Zhu Lian charged forward again, he grinned and said softly to Wei Xian behind him, "Kindly remind you that you can live if you die. The money spent is Chen Ping'an's money. Whether you feel the heartache or not depends on the mood of the four of us. But I advise you not to die so easily. For the time being, I can't give you a reason. It's just my intuition. Believe it or not, if you don't care, you can bypass these annoying flies who know some spells and go kill that Prince Liu Tsong. I won't stop you." Wei Xian seemed to be unwilling to accept his kindness. He asked, "Can you help me block the armored soldiers from entering the temple for a moment?" Zhu Lian had already kicked heavily. His body was like lightning. He turned his route several times and once again tangled with the accompanying cultivators and the armored soldiers at the side. Obviously, Zhu Lian would not help. Wei Xian punched a Daquan border soldier who was trying to hack at his mask. The soldier's chest armor caved in and he knocked away a comrade behind him. The soldier's corpse directly hit the ground and bled from his 7 orifices. He fell to the ground and could not get up. Wei Xian took the time to turn to Chen Ping'an and said, "To catch bandits, first catch the ringleader. Shall I try?" Chen Ping'an nodded in agreement. Wei Xian took a deep breath and rushed forward quickly. He only slightly bypassed the battlefield where Zhu Lian was. Zhu Lian laughed, "You will suffer if you don't listen to the advice of the elderly. It's rare that you have the heart of a bodhisattva, but you still treat it as a deaf ear. What a world." Chen Ping'an raised his head again and looked straight at the mountain peak. In the dilapidated temple, Pei Qian was showing off her belongings to the little lotus figure. She took out the treasure box again. For the first time, she did not have her guard up against that silly little lotus figure. Other than Chen Ping'an, it was the one that Pei Qian trusted the most in this world. However, the little lotus figure was absent-minded. It often stood on tiptoe and looked at Chen Ping'an outside the door. Pei Qian scolded it with a sullen face. "What? Don't you have confidence in my father? You have a broken arm and you are blind, right? Who is my father? Will he lose? Let me tell you. Even if I become a fool who doesn't like money one day, my father will not lose to others in a fight." The little lotus figure was confused. What was the relationship between the two? It could not understand what this bad-tempered tanned girl was thinking. Chen Ping'an's voice came into the dilapidated temple. "Use the branches to copy books and practice writing." Pei Qian, who was squatting on the ground, felt like she was struck by lightning. She secretly slapped the little lotus figure's head. She did not dare to do it, for fear that the 500 words would become 1,000 words. After getting up, she took the mountain walking stick and started to write Sage's articles on the ground. Every time she wrote a word, the little guy jumped and sank into the ground. Then it stuck its head out beside the word and giggled. Pei Qian rolled her eyes. How could there be such a boring little thing in the world? Was it a little idiot? Alas, she should talk to Chen Ping'an later. She could sell it for money and buy it a new book. On the top of the mountain, the buried river monster was eager to try. "Or I go down to practice." Wang Qi hesitated. The burly man looked at the rain. "In another quarter of an hour, the rain will be lighter. At that time, even if you beg me, I will be too lazy to do it. Don't forget, I'm not here to help you kill people. I'm just here to help my master keep an eye on the situation here. When the time comes, I just need to take the sword-cultivating gourd from Chen Ping'an's body and then I can leave." Of course, he also needed to help his master find the treasure that could hide from the mysteries of heaven. As for how to find it, it was very mysterious. Wang Qi, a rebellious gentleman of the academy, was not qualified to know this secret. The burly man quietly shifted his gaze and looked at Liu Baixiang, who was holding a narrow knife. Wang Qi thought carefully and nodded. "You can do it, but don't show your real body. Otherwise, I can't explain it to the Dafu Academy. The Hill Master is not easy to fool." The burly man sneered, "That's easy. Just say that I, the buried river monster, was enlightened by you and abandoned evil. I want to ask for a water god temple from you and the imperial court of Daquan. So I'm willing to do something in exchange for a legitimate identity. Why is it hard to explain?" Wang Qi smiled bitterly. Emperor Liu Zhen may believe this seemingly reasonable wording, but the hill master of the academy will definitely not take it seriously. "Okay, just do as I said. Don't fight Chen Pinggan with your true body as a monster. You only need to force Chen Pinggan to show a flaw." Wang Qi paused, full of murderous intent. "I want him to be destroyed here." The burly man curled his lips. "Okay, I hope you can do what you say and kill Chen Pinggan, who is waiting for us to come to him. Don't be a glib talker." At this point, the burly man laughed. "I almost forgot that you scholars are the best at glib talkers in our world. Sorry for the disrespect." Wang Qi did not want to lower himself to the same level as this barbarian monster. The buried river monster did not care whether the ruined temple would notice the movement at all. He strode out, and every step he took made the mountain tremble. He rushed out of the cliff at the top of the mountain in an instant, drawing an arc in the air, and finally landed with a loud crash, making a loud noise. Wang Qi sighed softly, his face full of sorrow. "Only after becoming a golden core cultivator can one be considered a member of my generation. It was just that one would grow old and wither. Even a golden core that he had painstakingly obtained would have a time when it would dim. How could he, Wang Qi, die when he had yet to fulfill his ambitions? This was especially so for golden core Qi refinement warriors. They had a much clearer understanding of life and death than those muddle-headed mortals. How torturous was it to count the days and wait for death? It's here. Chen Pinggan was not deaf and naturally knew that the burly river demon had made such a huge commotion at the bottom of the towering mountain peak. He held the withered branch that he had casually picked up with his left hand and patted the blade-strengthening gourd with his right hand. Chu Yi and Chu Yi flew out of the gourd and disappeared. He retracted his right hand into his sleeve and took out a demon pagoda subduing talisman that was made of golden talisman paper and personally written by Zhong Kuei with little snow cone. This rare talisman paper was given to the buried river monster by the Great Spring Imperial Court when the Green Touring Manor was founded. It was one of the 3 golden talisman papers that Zhong Kuei had given Chen Pinggan. It was the Wind Thunder paper with the dragon claw seal on the background. Chen Pinggan did not know the identity of the intruder for the time being. However, the world was so coincidental that a demon pagoda subduing talisman written in the Green Touring Manor happened to be used to kill a buried river monster. It was really the cycle of heaven and retribution. As for Chu Yi and Chu Yi, they were used after Chen Pinggan took out the demon pagoda subduing talisman and before he stabbed the intruder with his sword. They were used to stop the gentleman Wang Qi from coming to the rescue. The gentleman Wang Qi, who was standing on the mountain peak, sighed in his heart. It was indeed a thought that separated the god and the devil. He hoped that this siege would go smoothly. After this, he would no longer care about the grievances of the mortal world after he obtained the immortal's incantation. He would concentrate on cultivation and one day become the deputy headmaster of the academy. By then, he would make up for the fate of the Great Spring Empire. A young Taoist priest with a hibiscus crown on his head did not travel far with the wind. Instead, he shrank the ground time and time again and soon left the border of the Great Spring Empire and came to the south of the northern Jin Kingdom. He went all the way south and chose a quiet and remote forest and lake. Finally, he stopped at a mountain peak and disappeared. Underground, there was a completely different world. It seemed to be an ancient path that had been buried. The young Daoist walked for another 1,000 miles. There were many forks in this ancient path, but he didn't choose a direction and didn't hesitate at all. Along the way, the gloomy and magnificent underground phenomena did not stop the young Taoist priest for even a moment. Finally, he came to a dilapidated mountain gate. The plaque was crooked and half of it was broken, leaving only the 3 words Blasphemy Palace. When he stepped in, a subtle sword chi suddenly appeared and disappeared. There were broken walls and ruins everywhere. The young Taoist priest walked slowly. The Eagle Fortress, the Green Touring Manor, and Hua Town. Other than the inn where Zhonyang stayed, The other two places were not too important. To be precise, the Eagle Fortress used to be extremely important, but now it was a thing of the past. He did not want to think about it. Later on, during his travels in the Tonga continent, he unintentionally planted willows everywhere. As for the failure of the willows, the young Taoist priest did not care at all. Sweeping the world of the three kingdoms, either two big demons of the Fuyao sect and the Taiping Mountain were the key to his plan in the Tonga continent. However, he found that there was a guy of unknown origin who appeared again and again on the great path that he had walked. The first time was a coincidence, the second time was still a coincidence, but what about the third time? He had to be careful. If he was not careful, he would end up with a real body in his hometown that used the mountains as a pillow. If the damage to his soul was too severe, he would not be able to wake up for hundreds of years. By then, wouldn't he miss out on the great undertaking of expanding the territory and fighting for hegemony? How would he be able to obtain an unimaginably fertile territory for his family's descendants? He kept telling himself this in his heart. At the end of the path in the abandoned palace was an old site that looked like the ancient dragon-locking platform. A ragged white ape covered in blood sat cross-legged. It could not hide its ferocious aura that flowed out majestically. However, whenever the strands of sword chi that were condensed to the point of materialization drifted out of the huge stone platform, they would be struck by snow-white lightning and disappear without a trace. It was the white ape carrying a sword on his back from the Taiping Mountain that had fled here. However, the term carrying a sword no longer existed. The old ape asked in a hoarse voice, "Why did you come here to find me? Aren't you afraid that both of us will die here?" The young Taoist priest walked to the edge of the dragon-locking platform. He did not walk up the stairs. He smiled and said, "Don't worry. There's an old thing in my hometown who has long asserted that you are a lucky person. You won't die." The old ape asked, "What do you want?" The old ape glanced at the guy who was wearing a Taoist robe and a hibiscus crown. The more it looked at him, the more depressed it felt. Years ago, on the Taiping Mountain, the guy somehow changed his appearance and caught the attention of a core formation stage cultivator of the Taiping Mountain as a young man who had lost his memories. After he was brought to the mountain, he snuck into the Hall of Ancestral Masters and was given a jade badge of his lineage. He was the most promising genius of cultivation in the Taiping Mountain to break the awkward situation of a shortage of young people before he became a female Taoist priest. Even the Hall of Ancestral Masters of the Taiping Mountain was shocked by the speed at which he entered the core formation stage and broke through the bottleneck of the nascent soul stage. They did not hesitate to find a treasure that could conceal the secrets of heaven for him in order to prevent the Tongya sect and the Yugui sect from harboring evil intentions. After successfully entering the nascent soul stage at a young age, he spared no effort on his path of cultivation to slay demons and devils. He had a very good reputation. One day, perhaps he felt that the time was right or he suddenly became enlightened, he found the white ape in the well prison and revealed his shocking true identity. He ordered the white ape, who was the guardian of the mountain, to deliberately release a big demon at the bottom of the well prison. After a battle, both sides were injured and their primordial spirits were damaged. A young earth immortal who was less than 100 years old was reduced to a dying old man. His vitality was declining and his body was decayed. He was even more miserable than a 1,000-year-old nascent soul stage cultivator. After that, the young nascent soul stage cultivator left the mountain to travel with the reason that heaven never bars one's road. In the end, he fought a fierce battle with the core formation stage cultivator of the Fuyao sect. The latter lost his chance of reincarnation and attracted the incarnation of an ancient demon. The young nascent soul stage cultivator was killed in the end. The jade tablet of the Hall of Ancestral Masters of Taiping Mountain was gone. The important artifact that concealed the secrets of heaven was also destroyed. The most talented young Daoist of Taiping Mountain in the past sat on the steps with his back to the white ape. He smiled and said, "Zhong Kuei and Huang Ting must die. Especially Zhong Kuei. If he doesn't die, it won't be as simple as the Confucian school having another Grand Chancellor in the future. After the war, the people will be plunged into misery and suffering. Naturally, It will be the turn of ghosts and otherworldly items to run amok in the world. There's an old fellow in our hometown who happens to be good at this. If the Confucian school had Zhong Kuei, when the time comes, the ones who will die in our camp might be this many of you. He raised his arm high and stretched out 3 fingers. He said with a heavy tone, "At least." Then, the young daoist stretched out his remaining 2 bent fingers. "Actually, it's this many. I was afraid of scaring you just now." The white ape snorted disdainfully. Naturally, it didn't believe him. 5 of itself, that was 5 12th realm sword cultivators. That Zhong Kuei, who was killed in 3 moves, had this ability. The young daoist patted his knees lightly. "Now that you're hiding like a rat, at least you have something to look forward to. That one from the Fuswan sect caused my plan to fail. He deserved to be chased to the sea. His luck wasn't as good as yours. Even if he entered the sea, he still wouldn't be able to escape death. Now, let's see which of those 2 fellows leisurely rushing over will be able to pick up this great opportunity. His cultivation is only at the 12th realm. When he dies, he might be able to drag someone down with him. When I return to my hometown, I won't be too calculative with his descendants." The white ape frowned. "Even I can't find the scholarly sage guarding the sky screen of Tongya continent. Wouldn't it be even more difficult to find you? Why are you in such a hurry to leave?" That sage was one of the 72 statues of the scholarly temple. Even if his duty was to supervise the movements of the Tongya continent's territory, in his eyes, it was nothing more than specks of sparks in the human world. They were the images of Qi cultivators of the middle 5 realms, martial arts grandmasters, and human emperors. However, in the Battle of Taiping Mountain, the sage could only see 2 slightly larger balls of sparks. Only then would he use his supernatural powers and set his sights on Taiping Mountain. It was extremely difficult for a deity to observe the mountains and rivers. This was especially so when it came to countries and between continents. There were also invisible natural barriers. At the peak of Sui Mountain, the old scholar who was so fond of his secluded disciple was only making incantations. Unless there was a refined item on the person who wanted to pay attention to it, it would be a different story. It would be much easier. However, if that person had an item that could conceal the secrets of heaven, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. The young daoist priest held the back of his head with both hands and lay back, leaning against the steps. In order to prevent Taiping Mountain from searching for the hibiscus crown on my head, I took the initiative to destroy its appearance. Originally, it could still last for another 50 to 60 years. Now that the scholarly sage who has been drawing a prison in the heavens year after year has come to the human world early, it's hard to say. The saint who accompanied the sacrificial temple will definitely find me if he looks for me. The 3 great demons of the Tongya continent, Hua Town, Fusue sect, and Taiping Mountain, you sword-bearing white ape. There must be a mastermind behind this. Before they find me, I have to do something. Since my plan has failed and deviated from my initial expectations, I have to make them feel disgusted. For example, I can kill Chen Pingan and then Huang Ting. There's no rush, let's see how it goes. The white ape was silent. These schemes were really not his forte. The young daoist priest smiled. Only by being found can I retain a sliver of a chance of winning. Of course, I can't let them find me too easily, otherwise the scholarly faction will be suspicious. I have to make that scholarly sage look for me a little harder so that they can find me bit by bit. That young man called Chen Pingan, or perhaps Huang Ting's death later, are the leads. Otherwise, if I run back to my hometown with my tail between my legs, I'll really lose everything. After returning there, I'll have to suffer. Maybe I'll be banished to that mountain range to fend for myself and then be forced to do hard labor for that blind man. When I think of this, I'm a little worried. The white ape thought of the ancient rumor in the wilderness and was a little frightened. The young daoist priest clicked his tongue. I do miss my hometown a little. Here, my hands and feet are tied. I have to guard against the scholarly sage patrolling above me, and I also have to be wary of that mysterious daoist temple master. It's really tough. If not for the latter, my plan in Tongya continent would be much easier. I wouldn't have to deliberately avoid him. Huang Ting is lucky to have been thrown into the temple by that bad-tempered ancestor of ours. If possible, I really want to see that stinky cow's nose." His words came to an abrupt end. Over at the ruined temple, Pei Qian suddenly covered his eyes and rolled on the ground. Between his fingers, there seemed to be sunlight and moonlight shooting out. After a while, a tall old Daoist priest appeared near the dragon-locking platform of the underground palace and sneered. "Oh!" On the sea to the west of Tongya continent, a great demon that was thousands of feet in size stirred up huge waves and fled frantically. Behind him, there were several figures following him. On the sea, there was a sword cultivator who was in a bad mood. He didn't want to be that bullshit Daoist protector, but deep in his heart, he was a little worried that the chaos in Tongya continent would affect the young man that Xiao Qi had given all hope to. He really didn't want to appear in the human world, so he rode his sword on the sea to relax. He wandered left and right. Coincidentally, the sword cultivator's name was Left and Right. He saw the injured great demon that had tactfully changed its escape route. But he was in a bad mood, so he attacked with his sword. He killed it with one sword, too. (357) 10,000-word chapter. Wei Xian was wearing the West Mountain Nectar armor. After getting Chen Ping'an's approval, he tried to find an opportunity to kill Prince Liu Tsong while Wei Xian was holding back more than half of the cultivators following the army. He didn't care even if he had to sacrifice his life. After Sui Xiong killed the immortal master of Caomu nunnery, Xu Qingju left the mountain without saying a word even though he knew that Liu Tsong would vent his anger on the whole family. He returned to Mirage City and discussed countermeasures with his grandfather, who was the great general of the West. As one of the top general families in the Great Spring Dynasty and had been rooted in Mirage City for several generations, the Xu family was afraid of the first Prince Liu Tsong, but they wouldn't wait for death. The one sitting on the throne was still the current emperor, Liu Zhen, not Liu Tsong. If they really fell out with Liu Tsong, the Xu family would just be determined to rely on the second prince and replace him with a real dragon. The battlefield where Liu Baixiang was located was still in a stalemate. The 5,000 men of sacrifice of the Great Spring Border Army were indeed the direct subordinates of Liu Tsong. They knew that the military law was strict. Even though they were being killed and watched their fellow soldiers die one by one under that person's blade, they still didn't care about their lives and crazily charged forward. The martial arts grandmasters and cultivators who were hiding in the dark couldn't bear to watch. It was truly too tragic. Some of the cold-hearted military officers even had their faces covered in tears and rainwater, but they still dutifully carried out their duties. No matter who it was, those who dared to cower in fear and retreat were immediately beheaded. The ethereal poems of traveling immortals might be written about the elegance of the immortals on the mountain. However, there had never been any frontier fortress poems that could really write about the bloody cruelty of the battlefield. After the buried river demon fell to the ground from another mountain peak, he ran over in big strides and rushed straight. If there were trees blocking his way, he would hit them with one hand. Chen Ping'an looked at the momentum of the approaching person and made a decision in his heart. He replaced the talisman between the two fingers of his right hand in his sleeve with 3 talisman papers stacked together. Back in the Bio mansion, Zhong Kuei borrowed the small snow cone. In return, he wrote a total of 6 talisman papers for Chen Ping'an. 3 of them were his own. He wrote 3 talismans that could be formed by the talisman of 3 talents, which was also known as the Iron Cavalry circling the city talisman. Before writing the talisman, Zhong Kuei took a breath of noble spirit. There were more than 100 generals wearing silver armor and riding white horses. The cavalry army, which was the size of a grain of rice, charged out on the talisman paper. In the end, they arranged the troops and stopped their horses, turning into a talisman pattern. After that, Chen Ping'an took out 2 golden talisman papers and a green talisman paper from the sage's manuscript from his own pocket. Zhong Kuei bitterly followed Chen Ping'an's request and wrote the talisman of 5 thunders of the Taoist master mansion on Longhu Mountain, the barrier-breaking talisman to prevent ghosts from going up and down the mountain, and the last sword-suppressing talisman that was far superior to the Jing talisman in terms of rank and power. Zhong Kuei named it as the Sword of Throwing Fish Rises, the The Sea of Nine Provinces boils. The buried river demon, who did not dare to show his true form, was less than 100 steps away from Meng Qi. Chen Pinggan slowly walked out of the eaves and walked to the right side. Soon, the distance between the two sides was only 50 steps. Chen Pinggan shook his wrist and the 3 talismans were ignited by a puff of pure genuine qi. They quickly flew out of his sleeves and he said in his heart, "Array in front." The burly man laughed and did not stop walking. He jumped and attacked the young man who was holding the withered branch. A martial artist using talismans. "Aren't you afraid that I'll laugh my teeth off?" But soon, the buried river demon could not laugh at all. After the 3 golden talismans' bodies were burned up, the burly man who was still in the air was surprised to find that the 3 illusory talismans began to spin around him rapidly. The burly man's qi sank into his dantian and used the 1,000-pound drop. When he hurriedly landed on the ground, one of the 3 talismans' illusory cavalry with a white horse and silver armor rushed out with a spear. The burly man said sternly, "Go to hell." With a twist of his body, he spun in a circle and quickly smashed the 3 cavalry with 3 punches. But a steady stream of cavalry rushed out of the talisman. There were no more and no less, 3 at a time, and they were silent. The burly man was trapped in the center of the battle formation. He was still fearless and his fists were like rainbows. He killed the cavalry that rushed out of the talisman's formation again and again. Every time the burly man changed the battlefield, the 3 talismans would float with him and always maintain the original distance. The burly man was excited to kill. He revealed his ferocious appearance and only felt satisfied and happy. It was not difficult to temporarily trap and exhaust a river demon that was almost in the gold core stage with 3 commanders' orders. It was even possible to force the demon to reveal its true body. However, it was absolutely impossible to exhaust the great demon that buried the river to death. Chen Pinggan naturally knew this and did not expect the 3 talismans to trap and kill the burly man. The gentleman from the academy, Wang Qi, who stayed at the peak of the mountain, patiently waited for Chen Pinggan's flaw. Chen Pinggan was also looking for a chance to kill the burly man in the formation with a talisman or a sword. The rain was still pouring and there was no sign of it slowing down. The buried river demon was annoyed by the 3 strange talismans' entanglement. Why was it that the cavalry formed by the talisman's gallbladder's aura could not be killed? How many of them had he smashed into pieces and scattered their spiritual energy? 150, 200? It felt more and more that the situation was not good. The young man who was standing 30 steps away with the dried branch in his hand was definitely not waiting for it to break the talisman formation out of kindness. Then there would be a *T battle between gentlemen. Especially the dried branch in the corner of its eyes, it felt uneasy. Something was wrong, there was definitely something strange. Forget it. Wang Qi should be a coward and not do anything. I don't care how you reason with the Dafu Academy. The buried river demon with many small wounds on its body saw that the rain was about to fall. If it did not take advantage of the situation now, its power would be greatly reduced when it showed its true form. The eyes of the water demon were snow-white and its muscles began to twist extremely. Wang Qi at the peak of the mountain obviously saw the buried river demon's plan and shouted angrily, "No!" The water demon did not care about these. The earth suddenly trembled and showed its huge true form. Its eyes were as big as lanterns and its body was hundreds of feet long. Its head was at the place where the burly man stood. The cavalry whose aura had not been exhausted by the circling talisman pulled away from it. There were still armored cavalry charging towards the river demon. Some of the border soldiers of the Daquan who were hiding on both sides and waiting for an opportunity were directly bounced away by the body of the eel demon. When they flew out, they were bleeding from their 7 orifices. Dozens of people were either injured or killed. The heavy rain poured on the body of the river demon. After sliding down the mountain, it did not seep into the mud but quickly gathered into a stream. Chen Pinggan recognized the identity of this great demon. It was the eel demon that was fighting with the water goddess at the bottom of the river. It seemed that the hidden master at the peak of the mountain was no doubt the academy's gentleman, Wang Qi. He pinched the Dragon Tiger Mountain talisman that Zhong Kuei said was 5 dragons holding the pearl with 2 fingers. After injecting his genuine qi, he threw it at the head of the buried river demon. There were indeed 5 slender flood dragons more than 100 feet long hovering in the air with white pearls in their mouths. There were thunder and lightning lingering around. The buried river demon just thought that it was time for it to use its supernatural powers. It did not expect 5 flood dragons that faintly contained the power of heaven to appear above its head. After a slight stagnation, it roared loudly and began to struggle violently. It wanted to break free from the siege of the circling talisman and suffer as little as possible from the thunder and lightning pearls. The cavalry held their spears and pierced the body of the eel demon again and again. They allowed the body of the buried river demon to sweep them away. Their bodies dissipated together with their spiritual qi and returned to the world. A flood dragon opened its mouth and a snow-white thunder pearl shot out, smashing into the head of the buried river demon. The mountain trembled. 2 more pearls smashed onto the vital part of the river demon and its tail. Not only was its body shaking from the pain, the soul and golden elixir of the river demon were also trembling. The only good thing was that the huge force that burst out finally swept down and smashed the 3 damned talismans. A long green rainbow landed on the tree trunk of this mountain from another mountain peak. It pleaded with Chen Pinggan telepathically, "Both of us should stop now. I'll let Liu Tsong lead the troops and leave immediately. How about that?" When Wang Qi said these words, he gritted his teeth. That buried river demon was truly an incompetent thing that could only spoil things. After a flood dragon spat out the thunder and lightning pearl, it would automatically dissipate and disappear. Chen Pinggan did not have any intention of stopping. In the end, the 2 flood dragons naturally spat out the most righteous thunder magic beads that contained the most powerful magic in the world without any hesitation. The 5 flood dragons had already disappeared, but the 5 pearls were firmly embedded in the body of the buried river demon. From the head to the tail, when they finally connected into a line, they emitted a bright light. In the body of the river demon, thunder and lightning swam rapidly, finally forming a huge lightning bolt that was almost as thick as the river demon's body. Chuyi and Shouwu, who were telepathically connected with Chen Pinggan, changed their original strategy. They drew out 2 fireflies and pierced into the lantern-sized eyes of the buried river demon. Sui Yuyu also controlled the infatuation sword that had pierced through countless hearts and accurately nailed it into the head of the buried river demon. It pierced through, and the entire long sword directly entered the ground below the head. It was enough to show its sharpness. As for Wang Qi and Chen Pinggan, they acted almost at the same time. They both had the intention to kill. Chen Pinggan used the withered branch as a sword and swept out. And the heavy rain between heaven and earth seemed to be controlled by the gentleman Wang Qi in an instant. The raindrops changed their falling trajectory one by one. Tens of thousands of raindrops shot towards Chen Pinggan. After the sword, Wang Qi's figure was no longer on the branch. Chen Pinggan stood in the position of the gentleman of the academy. He shook his shoulders, and a wave of ripples surged out from his robe, bouncing off the raindrops that were embedded in the golden robe. As a gentleman of the academy, Wang Qi retreated to avoid the battle. The dying buried river demon could no longer control the stream of rainwater under its body. Its blood and rainwater seeped into the soil together. The withered branch in Chen Pinggan's hand turned into powder. He swept over to the head of the buried river demon. He reached out in the air and grasped the infatuation sword in his hand. He directly chopped off the entire head of the buried river demon. The heavy rain gradually stopped. Soon the soldiers on the mountain began to retreat down the mountain. In the end, Wei Xian did not manage to capture the first Prince Liu Tsong. He only killed a sword practitioner who had sworn to protect him. He had to let Liu Tsong retreat to the foot of the mountain and put away the military school's armor pill in his sleeve. Zhu Lian was the most seriously injured, but he did not die even once. Lu Baixiang walked towards the buried river demon's body. Only then did he have the chance to pull out the special arrows from his body. He did not throw them away. Instead, he held them in his hand and sheathed his narrow saber. On the western sea of the Tongye continent, The great demon that had revealed its true form to escape was inexplicably killed on the spot by a sword. Its entire head, which was as large as a mountain, fell neatly into the sea after being sliced by a silk thread. Its corpse, which was as long as a mountain, was still floating on the sea, bobbing up and down. The three great cultivators of Tongye continent who had chased it all the way here all had different thoughts. The current lord of Taiping Mountain, Song Maro, held his long sword upside down with the tip of the sword facing backwards to show his sincerity and gratitude. He said loudly, "Song Maro of Taiping Mountain thanks Senior for helping us kill the great demon." However, the sword practitioner whose sword aura flowed wildly like a waterfall ignored the lord of Taiping Mountain's goodwill. The patriarch of Tongye sect, who was in charge of the sect's discipline and genealogy, had a gloomy expression. Song Maro was the only one who did all he could to chase the great demon all the way. He did not care about his own life and wanted to perish together with the great demon. However, although Song Maro was the first lord of Taiping Mountain in name, his cultivation was not very high. This time, he did not dare to bring one of the Mountain Protector celestial swords because of the incident in the well prison. Therefore, he did not have the strength to do so. As for the patriarch of Tongye sect, who was the leader of Tongye continent's immortals, he did not want to risk his cultivation to kill the great demon. A great demon that had fallen but was still in the 11th realm was not easy to deal with. The outcome was already decided. This beast would not be able to escape from the three people's sight. What was the hurry? Therefore, the patriarch of Tongye sect, who was in the unpolished Jade realm, regarded this mission as a good one. Killing the great demon that was wreaking havoc in Fuji sect would not only bring him good karma, but also make Ji Hai, the sect master of Fuji sect, who had lost his Daoist companion, feel grateful. Therefore, although he had been discreet during the chase and did not use the sect's most precious treasure, he was determined to kill the great demon in his heart. The patriarch of Jiang clan, who controlled the Cloud Cave blessed land of Yugue sect, had a jade-like face. In terms of appearance, he was even younger and more handsome than his only son, Jiang Beihai. At this moment, he was full of smiles. Obviously, he was in a good mood after the great demon was killed by the sword practitioner on the sea and the patriarch of Tongye sect's plan failed. After all, he did not bring the sect's immortal weapon with great killing power. For the sake of his good friend Lu Fang's Tao of Sword, he secretly went to Lotus Flower Blessed Land, which was equivalent to disappearing from Tongye continent for 60 years. There were many complaints in Yugue sect. Therefore, he was pushed out. He wanted the horse to run but did not feed the horse. Wouldn't this patriarch of Jiang clan slack off in his work? Dressed in a Daoist robe and wearing a hibiscus crown, perfected Lord Taiping Mountain Song Maro, although he was slightly unhappy, he was clear about what was right and wrong. The other party was arrogant and did not put him and Taiping Mountain in his eyes at all. He had his confidence. However, he could not think of when such a sword practitioner with great swordsmanship had appeared in Tongye continent. Song Maro could not figure out the other party's temperament and background. He did not know why the other party attacked. Was he taking the opportunity to kill the great demon to obtain good karma, or was it purely because he saw injustice on the road? Could it be that he coveted the great demon's body full of treasures? Or even wanted to take it all for himself and not allow the other three to touch it? Song Maro naturally did not care about the great demon's body. However, this great demon was the main culprit of the chaos in Tongye continent. It was because of its cooperation with the old beast, the sword-bearing white ape, that the great demon ran rampant in the central part of Tongye continent. It had to be moved back and let the Confucian Academy take a look. Then, the Academy would ask the school of Yin-Yang to predict the future. Therefore, Song Maro did not know what to say for a moment. That strange sword practitioner looked at the founder of the Tongye sect and said 2 words. "You're not convinced." The founder, who was famous in the entire Tongye sect, said some words with hidden killing intent. "It's best to keep this great demon alive and bring it back to the Tongye sect. Who knows, we might be able to find out more about the conspiracy. You saw that the great demon was severely injured and killed it with a sword. That would cut off all clues. How are we going to find the mastermind behind the scenes? Otherwise, Why would the three of us chase it so far? What a coincidence. The Tongye sect's West Sea is so vast. You just happened to appear on the great demon's escape route? The smile on the face of the head of the Jiang family of the Jade Gui sect did not change. He never complained about things being too lively. Song Maro was about to speak. That strange sword practitioner who looked like a middle-aged man said indifferently, "Then let's do it." From beginning to end, the sword practitioner only said these two words. He was not convinced. Let's do it. This was not the style of an immortal on the mountain. Even the middle 5 chi refinement warriors halfway up the mountain might not be so vulgar. It was more like a martial artist at the bottom of the pugilistic world. Song Maro did not have time to be a peacemaker. Another sword strike. Only this time, it was delivered to the unconvinced founder of the Tongye sect. That old immortal's expression changed drastically. Unable to say a single word, he hurriedly summoned a natal magic treasure that he had refined for 1,000 years. It was an ancient ritual bell that he had obtained from a shattered grotto heaven. The bell was the head of the 8 notes. This ancient bronze bell that was no taller than an arm after refinement hovered above the head of the Tongye sect's founder. The ancient bell projection was dozens of feet tall, enveloping the old man within. The outer wall of the ancient bell was engraved with an inscription of an ancient Confucian sage of merit and virtue. At this moment, the words that were the size of a fist were circulating rapidly. The old man stood within it, looking solemn and dignified. However, when the sword chi cleaved down on his head, the old man who thought that he could at least resist for a moment realized that the ancient bell projection in front of him had been split apart. He no longer dared to be careless and retreated with his natal bronze bell, hoping that the sword chi would weaken after he retreated thousands of feet away. He retreated again and again. On the surface of the sea that was more than 10 miles long, there was a ravine that had not been filled by seawater for a long time. When the sword chi finally disappeared, the founder of the Tongye sect was pale. He was shocked and distressed. Holding the natal ancient bell in his hand, he saw a fine scratch on it. How many heavenly materials and earthly treasures did he have to use to repair it? How could that sword cultivator's casual sword strike be so powerful? Not to mention the Tongye continent, not to mention the small Aquarius continent in the north. Even the Hassa continent should not have such a sword immortal. Cao Shi, who had refined a large river into a flying sword on her wrist, and the person in charge of guarding the Zhunhai Tower, definitely did not have such a sword chi. The sword cultivator pushed the old cultivator back with one strike. After rolling so far away, he was finally not an eyesore. He turned to the other person and asked, "Was it fun?" The smile on the master of the Jiang clan's face immediately stiffened. He cupped his fists and apologized, "Please forgive me for my rudeness." The sword cultivator sneered, "Senior? You are much older than me." The master of the Jiang clan was famous for his fearlessness on the Tongye continent mountain. He said seriously, "On the path of cultivation, the one who reaches the top wins. I, Jiang Shangzhen, do not dare to be mentioned in the same breath as you." The sword cultivator no longer paid attention to Jiang Shangzhen, who he had never heard of. He looked at the old man who was further away with lingering fear. "You seem to have a treasure that is good at attacking." "Not bad. Can you let me have a look?" The founder who had suffered a lot knew the temper of this sword cultivator. He was more hot-tempered than the Lord of Heaven of the Taiping Mountain. He did not dare to show his sect's treasure stupidly. It was obvious that the sword cultivator would not give up. What if he said, "Since you have already taken it out, don't waste it. Let's exchange moves and see how powerful it is." Should he take it or not? If he did not take it, the people of the Yugue sect and the Taiping Mountain were watching from the side. If he took it, it would be fine if he took it. But if he could not, would he be buried together with the big demon? The old cultivator no longer dared to put on airs. He hurriedly said, "Carrying the sect's treasure is only for killing demons. It cannot be casually revealed." He cursed in his heart. There was actually such a domineering and unreasonable sword cultivator in the world. What was the scholarly sage doing? Did he not care? Without waiting for the old cultivator to feel that he had shown weakness by conceding, The sword cultivator had a bit of a brain and should know when to stop. The sword cultivator asked, "If you don't take it out, how can you take my second move?" The founder of the Tongye sect was furious. "Do you really think I am a clay bodhisattva with no temper?" Jiang Shangzhen kept a straight face, but he was secretly happy. He had long been sick of the Tongye sect cultivator's annoying face. It was not only him. The entire Yugui sect was like this, especially their old sect master. The few times he got angry in his life could be counted on one hand, and it was almost all thanks to the Tongye sect cultivator. Lord of Heaven of the Taiping Mountain Song Maro said in a deep voice, "Demons are in chaos in the Tongye continent now. Senior Sword Immortal, please do not use your sword today." The sword cultivator retracted his gaze. "Then you will take this move?" Song Maro said without hesitation, "Yes. Regardless of whether I can take it or not, the people of the Tongye sect and Yugui sect are here and will send a message to Taiping Mountain. I, Song Maro, am not as good as you. Even if I die here, Taiping Mountain will not hate you." After the sword cultivator muttered Taiping Mountain twice, he seemed to remember something and smiled for the first time. "You are indeed a cultivator of Taiping Mountain. Not bad. In the Tongye continent, you are the only decent ones. The rest are not worth mentioning." Song Maro was stunned and did not know what to say. The sword cultivator suppressed the sword chi all over his body, indicating that he would not use his sword again. Forget it, he remembered that Xiao Qi once mentioned this Taiping Mountain. What did he say again? Had an ancient chivalrous aura? The sword cultivator said, "Just take the corpse of the great demon." Song Maro felt relieved. After sheathing his sword, he cupped his fists and said, "Senior Sword Immortal, thank you for killing the demon." The sword cultivator hesitated for a moment and looked at the three people, asking, "Does anyone know a young man called Chen Pingan? Do you know where he is now?" Song Maro and the founder of the Tongye sect were both confused. Jiang Shangzhen quickly weighed the pros and cons in his mind and said with a smile, "I happen to know." The sword cultivator asked, "What do you mean?" Jiang Shangzhen told this eccentric sword cultivator through telepathy, concisely describing what he had seen and heard in the lotus flower-blessed land. The sword cultivator nodded and said disapprovingly, "The number one in the world in a small blessed land is passable." Jiang Shangzhen asked tentatively, "Senior, do you need to take care of him?" The sword cultivator squinted. "Are you worthy?" Jiang Shangzhen smiled helplessly and said no more. The sword cultivator left. He was getting further and further away from the Tongye continent. He was too lazy to be anyone's guardian. When the sword cultivator was far away, Jiang Shangzhen said with a cheeky smile, "Our vast world is indeed more interesting." Song Maro asked curiously, "Do you know this great sword immortal?" Jiang Shangzhen smiled and said nothing. The old cultivator of the Tongye sect who had carefully returned to the two snorted, "This person's sword skills are good, but," Jiang Shangzhen gloated, "But what?" The old cultivator swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He was really afraid of that guy's sword. It was too unreasonable. The next moment, the old cultivator felt that his ancestral grave was emitting smoke. It turned out that the sword cultivator had returned in an instant. He glanced at the old cultivator and said to Jiang Shangzhen, "This great demon's monster core is yours." Jiang Shangzhen cupped his fists and smiled, "I know what to do." The sword cultivator left the mortal world again. In the side palace of the Broken Dragon Vein in the Tongye continent, the white ape saw a tall old man in a daoist robe. The young daoist smiled awkwardly. The old daoist smiled and asked, "Are you happy that your wish came true?" The young daoist said bitterly, "I'm very surprised." The white ape sitting on the dragon-locking platform, although he couldn't make a plot that would bring chaos to half the continent like the young daoist, but after thousands of years of cultivation, he still had a discerning eye. The master of the daoist temple was said to be the old daoist of the Eastern Sea that no one could find. If one wanted to enter the lotus flower-blessed land, they could only find the little daoist boy with the golden gourd on his back. A group of real Earth immortals had to patiently discuss business with a little guy. The young daoist stood up and asked, "Old daoist, are you here to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and kill me?" The old Daoist sneered, "The sky has collapsed, how can I enforce justice on behalf of the heavens? I'm here to see who has the guts and ability to covet the Tongya umbrella that I gave away." The young Daoist suddenly said, "Is it the oil paper umbrella that the little girl casually held in her hand?" He sighed, "If I knew that Chen Pinggan was related to you, I wouldn't dare to offend you." "Wouldn't that be asking for trouble?" The old Daoist brushed past the young Daoist and walked up the dragon-locking platform step by step. "I'm not interested in the mortal world. I won't kill you. It's time to let some people in the happy nest remember, or else they'll forget what those old bones did in the past." The young Daoist turned around and followed behind the old Daoist from the Eastern Sea Monastery with a smile. "Thank you for your mercy, old senior." With the old Daoist's words, even if his plan in the Tongya continent was leaked in advance, it could still be considered a blessing in disguise. After returning to the wasteland, at least he wouldn't be exiled to that mountain range to be a laborer for a blind man. He had to move mountains year after year and put them here and there. Others might find it fun, but which great demon wouldn't feel that it was better to die than to live? The key was that for some reason, the overlords of the wasteland didn't seem to want to work together to pull out this big nail and throw it to the Great Wall of Sword Chi. The old Daoist walked up to the dragon-locking platform and glanced at the white ape who looked as if he was facing a great enemy. He nodded, "Little bastard, you're quite interesting. I'll go with the flow. Remember to take out your sword technique in the lotus flower-blessed land." In an instant, the white ape of Mount Taiping, who had no immortal sword to carry, disappeared from the dragon-locking platform. The young Daoist's mind raced as he silently deduced. He asked, "Since the white ape is no longer here, why don't you get straight to the point? What do you want me to do?" The old Daoist asked in return, "What do you want to do?" The young Daoist admitted, "If I say it, I'll die on the dragon-locking platform. It's better if I don't say it." The old Daoist was a little disappointed. "I've already given you a chance. You're a great demon at the peak of the true body realm, only a hair's breadth away from the 13th realm. You didn't even dare to kill Chen Pinggan, so you missed a great opportunity. Back then, the Great Wall of Sword Chi's Chen Qingdu borrowed Chen Pinggan's sword in order to transfer some karma to Chen Pinggan. If you kill him, you'll be doing a great deed for the wasteland. As for me, I can also take the opportunity to take Chen Pinggan into the monastery. Not only can I anger that old scholar to death, but I can also raise my own position in the praying mat." The young Daoist was shocked. The old Daoist smiled. "It's too late now." The young Daoist stomped his foot, filled with regret. The ancient dragon-locking platform beneath his feet rumbled as lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the pitch-black void outside. The old Daoist said, "If you're a human, you'll have a good future as a school of vertical and horizontal. As for a school of yin-yang, your aptitude isn't too good." The young Daoist nodded helplessly. "That's true." The old Daoist suddenly said something with deep meaning. "Actually, if you juniors from 2 realms were born earlier and were lucky enough to live until today, many of you wouldn't be too bad." The young Daoist fell into deep thought. The old Daoist clasped his hands behind his back and made a grabbing motion. The lightning bolts outside the dragon sealing platform broke through the restrictions and rules and rushed into the dragon sealing platform. They gathered in the old Daoist's palm and eventually formed a fist-sized lightning ball. The young Daoist couldn't help but stop his train of thought and smile bitterly. This was the difference between them. It had nothing to do with one's realm. The old Daoist put the ball of lightning into his sleeve and said softly, "One of the 100 schools of thought that the old scholar looked down on, there was one person who revealed the greatest secret of this world." The young Daoist's eyes were burning. "Senior, please enlighten this junior." The old Daoist turned his head, his eyes cold. "You're a demon, yet you call me senior and call yourself junior? Are you calling me an old bastard?" He didn't give the young Daoist any chance. The already incomplete soul floated out of the carefully selected skin and was grabbed by the neck by the old Daoist. The body of the young Daoist of Taiping Mountain collapsed to the ground and disappeared into thin air just like the white ape. Only the hibiscus crown of one of the 3 Daoist sects remained on the dragon-locking platform. The old Daoist waved his hand, and the human form of the great demon's soul was still that of the young Daoist. It was heavily smashed to the ground with a pained expression. Even so, he hurriedly took the hibiscus crown and put it on his head. Back then, in order to successfully cross the Great Wall of Sword Chi, he had to hide his one soul and 4 spirits. Only then could he leave the wasteland, enter the inverted mountain, and finally come to the Tongyi continent. However, after cultivating in the vast world for so long, his skin was extremely good, so he eventually reached the 12th realm of immortals. However, under the old Daoist's hands, he couldn't fight back at all. The old Daoist said slowly, "Someone once said, take half of a foot of water, and it will never be exhausted." The great demon who relied on the hibiscus crown to stabilize his soul said with difficulty, "It's one of the most famous pieces of knowledge of the founder of a famous school. I've seen it many times in various books, but I've never thought about it seriously." The old Daoist sneered, "That's why I said you were stupid." The great demon who was only left with his soul and no physical body wore the hibiscus crown on his head. He was anxious and had never missed his hometown so much. The old Daoist turned his head and smiled, "I've already removed the restriction on the narrow saber Shueting, a relic of the past. Do you mind?" The great demon shook his head and didn't say anything. The old Daoist laughed, "You don't even know how to flatter. Serves you right for suffering such a disaster." The great demon was confused. The old Daoist had already stepped into the void and left. When Chen Pingan opened the life scroll on the right side of the Sui dynasty, he threw in a gold essence copper coin. In the capital of the Nanyuan Kingdom of the Lotus Blossom Blessed Land, there was a drizzle. In the early winter, although the rain wasn't heavy, it was still a little annoying. A group of 4 people walked on the street. The young man in the lead was androgynous and very handsome. In the winter, he held a folding fan in his hand. He didn't open it and gently tapped his palm. In the eyes of the people of the Nanyuan Kingdom, if not for his good looks, he would be an elegant person. The 4 of them walked on the street. The young man looked left and right and clicked his tongue in wonder. There was a young boy named Cao Qinglang. He had already walked out of his shabby alley to the street, but because of the sudden rain, he had no choice but to run home to grab an oil paper umbrella. When he reached the corner of the alley, he saw a group of people in the distance. His eyes were filled with hope as he stared at them. But when he vaguely saw the face of the young master, he was somewhat disappointed. Alone, he quickly walked toward the school. Teacher Zhong disliked people being late when teaching. Cao Qinglang couldn't see the young man clearly. However, the latter saw through him clearly. As a banished immortal who had preserved his cultivation base and landed in the lotus flower-blessed land with his true body and complete soul, Lu Tai had entered the ranks of the newest 10 people in the world the moment he landed. As for the 3 retainers behind him, they received the same treatment. However, they were limited by the fact that they didn't have a strong foundation in the world and were also young. Therefore, they were at most second-rate masters in the Jianghu. They were still some distance away from being first-rate masters. Huan Yin, who almost had a mental breakdown in that disaster, changed his allegiance to Lu Tai's young Taoist priest, Huang Shong. Dao Xieyang, an external talent of the Eagle Fortress, was the evil cultivator with the 5 sacred mountains crown on his head. He was a chess piece nailed into the Eagle Fortress. Now, the 3 of them were Lu Tai's unofficial disciples. Lu Tai came to a street adjacent to Zhuangyuan Alley. There was a martial arts school nearby. Lu Tai looked at a small house. It used to be the place where Ding Ying and Ye stayed after entering the capital. It was considered a stronghold of the evil sect in the Nanyuan Kingdom. However, after the war ended, the imperial tutor Zhongqiu had been keeping this house. Lu Tai smiled and said, "From now on, this is my private residence." He turned his head and instructed the 3, Huang Shong, "Go to the Lake Mountain faction. How much you can learn from Yu Zhini will depend on your luck. As for Dao Xieyang and Huan Yin, you 2 are free to wander around this blessed land. Dao Xieyang can pay more attention to General Tang Tieri, while Huan Yin can get closer to the armed Saint Cheng Yuanshan. After 60 years, if you can't make it into the top 10 in the world, then obediently become nourishment for this blessed land. Good luck. I've already given you each a life-saving item." If you still drown in this small jianghu, I feel that it's a waste of money to bring you down here. Lu Tai waved his hand. The three of them respectfully bid farewell and left. Not far away stood a green-robed Confucian with white hair on his temples. He was the Master Zhong in Cao Qinglang's eyes. Today, it was not the naughty and sleepy students who were late. Instead, it was this stern old man who was late himself. Lu Tai smiled and looked at the imperial tutor Zhong Qiu. I'm friends with Chen Pinggan. I've personally experienced the splendor of the imperial tutor, so I've chosen to settle down in the Nanyuan kingdom. Zhong Qiu nodded. In that case, I'll wait and see. I still hope that you won't be so reckless, even if you're Chen Pinggan's friend. With a snap, Lu Tai opened his elegant bamboo fan and gently fanned the breeze and drizzle. He smiled and said, "Have you ever thought about going out to see the scenery 60 years later?" Zhong Qiu shook his head and turned to leave. Lu Tai did not mind and turned to look at the door. After a year of wind and sun, the door gods were slightly old. He muttered to himself, "It's almost the new year. The door gods need to be changed, the couplets need to be put up, and a few more pleasing girls to be maids. Why don't I go to the Spring Tide Palace and ask for a few from the hairpin boy, Jusha?" After Chen Pinggan threw the second gold copper coin into the scroll, Chen Pinggan felt a chill run down his spine. In the Lake Mountains sect of the Songlai Kingdom, a fine sun rain fell. No one made a fuss, except for the childlike sect leader, Yu Zhani, who was flying on his sword. Yu Zhani hovered in the air on his sword. The strong wind blew his Taoist robe and made a sound. He said softly, "A storm is coming." In an official residence in the capital city of the Nanyuan Kingdom, a youth had just walked out of the library with a book in his hand when an object fell from the sky and landed in front of him. It almost hit him, giving the youth a fright. Taking a closer look, it was a skinny little white ape covered in blood. The little guy was lying on the ground with a dispirited look. Its eyes were even more confused than the teenager holding the book. At the border of the Beijing Kingdom in the Lotus Flower Blessed Land, a young Taoist stood by the lake and stared at the mirror image in the lake. He repeatedly muttered, "Who am I? Who am I?" Finally, with a splitting headache, he squatted down with his head in his hands. The atmosphere in the ruined temple was strange. Everyone was sitting around the bonfire. Chen Pinggan only said one sentence, "You've worked hard." Zhu Lian rejected the porcelain bottle that Chen Pinggan handed over. He said that it was the best medicine for such injuries. There was no need to waste the young master's elixir. Then, he glanced at Sui Yuyu, who was already in the golden body state. The martial arts madman asked with a smile, "Young master, I also have something that I can't understand." Chen Pinggan nodded and said, "Tell me." Zhu Lian was covered in blood and many of his bones were exposed. He still smiled as usual. After eating one coin, from 11 to 10, after that, stop. What do you mean? Sui Yuyu suddenly stood up, his murderous aura surging. However, he realized that Chen Pinggan had not returned the sword of infatuation to him after taking it away. Sui Yuyu stared at the stooped old man. "Zhu Lian, why didn't you say so earlier?" Chen Pinggan said slowly, "It should be that every time you die, I use a golden essence copper coin to invite you out of the painting. In the future, your highest martial arts achievement will fall from the legendary 11th realm, the martial god state, to the 10th realm. After eating two, you can only become a grandmaster of the 9th realm. The so-called peak state is the limit of martial arts in the eyes of ordinary martial artists." Sui Yoyo's expression was sorrowful, his murderous aura thickening. He hated Zhu Lian, but hated Chen Pinggan even more. He could not suppress it. Zhu Lian chuckled and said, "I understand. Thank you, young master, for answering my questions." Chen Pinggan suddenly stood up and walked straight out of the temple. "Sui Yuyu, come with me. I have something to say to you." Inside the temple, Sui Yoyo's eyes were cold. Chen Pinggan still did not look back. He stepped over the threshold. "If you don't come out to find me in the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, I will burn the painting. You don't have to return the 2 golden essence copper coins you owe me." Only then did Sui Yuyu walk out of the temple expressionlessly. He quickly followed the figure walking on the mountain path. Chen Pinggan followed behind Sui Yuyu. He did not seem to care whether or not she would explode and kill. He said slowly, "If your state of mind is broken, how can you practice the sword in the future? Sui Yuyu, if you only have this much wisdom, I think you don't need to practice the sword at all. Anyway, without old Taoist Donghai's restraint, you won't be able to reach the top." Sui Yoyo's fingers moved slightly. Chen Pinggan continued walking slowly in front. He said indifferently, "You will die. If you really want to die, I have something to say to you before you die." Sui Yuyu was silent. After a quarter of an hour, Chen Pinggan and Sui Yuyu returned to the temple one after another. Although Sui Yoyo's complexion was very bad, her state of mind seemed to have improved. There was no trace of murderous intent. She also did not have the crazy desire to kill everyone in the temple because of the collapse of her martial arts. The two sat by the fire again. Chen Pinggan took Pei Qian's bowl of rice and began to eat his second bowl of rice. The flatterer Pei Qian was still squatting beside him, holding a small jar of pickles in his hands. Chen Pinggan looked around and asked with a smile, "What do you think of this strange world?" The four were silent for a moment. Lu Baixiang was the first to speak with a smile. "What is the matter in the mountain? Pine flowers make wine, spring water makes tea. I wish for great freedom." Zhu Lian laughed. "Love moves in the world, but in the middle of summer white porcelain plum soup, the sound of broken ice hitting the wall. I wish for the beauty's heart." Wei Xian thought for a moment and said something befitting of his identity as the founding emperor, "Killing millions of soldiers, the blood of the precious sword is still fishy." Pei Qian glared at him. "Old Wei, *T. Can't you speak properly?" Wei Xian nodded. "This is a poem given to me by a scholar of Nanyuan Kingdom. If I were to recite it myself, it would be, under the heavy rain, the price of firewood and rice rises. Using the bench as firewood, scaring the bed." Pei Qian nodded and smiled. "Old Wei, this poem is much better than the previous one. I can understand it." Wei Xian accepted it with a grin. "Back then, there were many great scholars who sincerely said that I did have some talent in literature." Pei Qian rolled his eyes. Sui Yuyu continued, "I wish to follow the teacher to the heavenly altar and sweep the fallen flowers with the immortals." Chen Pinggan turned to Pei Qian and asked with a smile, "You're the only one left." Pei Qian was surprised and said shyly, "I haven't studied much yet. I don't know how to compose poems yet." Chen Pinggan ate a big mouthful of rice and picked up some pickles with his chopsticks. He smiled, "I didn't ask you to compose a poem." Pei Qian was in high spirits. "Then I'll really say it. Don't be angry, don't scold me." Chen Pinggan nodded. Pei Qian said loudly, "I want to read the worst books, eat the most expensive dishes, scold the worst people, and beat the wildest dog." Chen Pinggan almost choked on his rice. Pei Qian saw that the situation was not good and felt that his ambition was not big enough. He glanced at the mountaineering staff by his feet and hurriedly added, "How about I add the biggest hornet's nest?" Wei Xian said with a straight face, "At such a young age, you already have such a tyrannical ambition." Pei Qian grinned at Old Wei and gave him a thumbs up. "Old Wei, you're still the best. You have a good eye. No wonder you can become an emperor. Alas, it's just that you're a bit poor now." Chen Pinggan shook his head and laughed. Outside the ruined temple, the rain stopped. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.